All right. Welcome to our first live episode that we've done in 2024. For those of you that are new to Making the Argument, I am your host, Nick Freitas. With me in the studio, my beautiful bride, Tina, Queen of the Bees.
Hello, everyone.
We also have our resident historian and political prognosticator, Christian Hines.
Hello.
And then our producer of producers, Nicholas Hamilton, the good Hamilton, the one that doesn't like central banking. How you doing over there, Nick? He's giving us a thumbs up because he's not mic'd up. We're not letting him talk today. Well, listen, right off the bat, I think everyone knows what we're talking about and why. So Trump has been found guilty on all charges by a New York jury. And social media pretty much blew up last night for obvious reasons. And look, here on Making the Argument, one of the things that we try to do is provide everybody with sound reason, logical consistency in our arguments, empirical evidence for what we believe and why. We're also honest to you about what we believe, right? We obviously are coming from the right. All of us are very, very committed to concepts of individual liberty, private property rights, free markets, and the rule of law, right? That's something that we typically stand by here is the rule of law. But I'm going to start off by reading a tweet for you, and this is going to give you an idea of kind of where I'm coming from. Now, if you're watching this from the left, chances are you already know what you think about Trump, and maybe you already know what you think about me, and so maybe none of this matters, right? If you're someone that has loved Donald Trump from day one, then you're probably looking at someone like me going, well, you know, nice of you to catch up. But if you're someone that is still, I don't know, you're still batting this around and you're still not quite sure what to think. Maybe you're someone that generally considers themselves liberal, but lately you have just been very, very uncomfortable with what you've seen with the direction of the Democratic Party, especially the direction that woke has tended to take the Democratic Party. Maybe you're someone that's a little bit more on the right, but you've always been a little bit uncomfortable with Donald Trump. I'm going to read this off, and then I'm going to provide you a bit of an explanation. And then what we're also going to do is we're actually going to provide some in-depth analysis and try to explain what I think this conviction means for the country, not just for Donald Trump, but for the country, and why I think all of this is a whole lot bigger than Donald Trump. Okay, so here's what I ended up writing yesterday on Twitter, which I didn't expect to get 3.5 million views in less than 12 hours, but here we are. I said, well, Democrats, congratulations. I didn't start out a Trump fan. I supported Rand Paul in the primary in 2016. I was skeptical of whether or not Trump would do what he said. Even after supporting him in 2020, I was still frustrated by some of his policies. But now I will enthusiastically campaign, donate, and vote for Trump because if nothing else, he represents opposition to you. The people who engage in lawfare, openly target your political rivals for prosecution while ignoring the real issues facing this country. You have now showed us the rules of the game. Don't be surprised when we start playing by them. Now, this obviously has gotten a lot of positive feedback from people that support Donald Trump, but it's also gotten a lot of negative feedback from people, some of whom have decided to call me out and say, you know, Nick, you talk a real good game about being a loyal husband and a good father, and so much of your content is rooted in this idea that you believe in certain moral principles and that you believe that everybody should be held accountable to those moral principles. And yet, when your boy Donald Trump gets convicted, all of a sudden, all that goes out the window, and you don't care about rule of law, and you don't care about intellectual consistency, and you don't care about morals, because let's remember, the whole reason he's on trial is paying hush money to a porn star that he cheated on his wife with, right? That's the argument. That's the argument. And we're going to analyze some of those arguments. But I want to say something up front, just so I make myself entirely clear. I've never been a never Trumper. But one of the biggest problems that I had with Donald Trump when he first ran, I want to take you back to 2015. In 2015 and 2016, when all this was going on, I had been elected to the House of Delegates. And for as long as I can remember, I had held on to certain principles, both morally and politically. And I had fought for those. I had always tried to diligently fight for those ever since I was young. And I was helping out with other campaigns and things like that, to the point where I was helping out with campaigns here in Virginia and the chairman of a local committee, and to the point where I ran my own campaign and was carrying legislation and fighting for these things on the House floor. And I had been very, very consistent in my dedication to individual liberty, personal property rights, free markets, this concept that what America meant is that you have a right to live your life the way you want, provided you don't infringe on the rights of others, and trying to keep government within its proper place. I felt like I had been intellectually consistent and dedicated to those principles. And in 2015-16, when he was running, I did not think the same of Donald Trump. And so I was skeptical of him. And what that caused a lot of people at that time to do was question my commitment. And I'm going to be honest with you, I took an incredible amount of offense to that. Because here I was, I'm like, wait a second. I've never given money to the Clintons. I've never been in favor of gun confiscation or gun bans. I've never been in favor of abortion all the way up to the point of birth. I've never done these things, but he had. And the response I got back was, yeah, but now he's seen the light and he's the one that's going to fight. And I said, well, yeah, you say that, and maybe it's true, but I don't know. And how dare you tell me that I'm just supposed to take his word for it? That was my attitude. But on election day, I had a choice. It was Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, and there was no way I was voting for Hillary Clinton. So I voted for Donald Trump, and I hoped that he would stand by the things that he had said when he ran for office. In 2020, I was far more comfortable voting for President Trump because at that point I thought, okay, he really has proven with respect to his Supreme Court nominees. He really has proven with respect to some of the other policies that he's engaged in. He really has proven by not getting us involved in even more wars that this is a guy that I think, even with our differences, some of them moral and some of them policy, this is a guy that I think truly loves his country and is willing to fight for it and understands what the nature of the fight is. So I'm willing to support him. And so in 2020, I campaigned and I voted for him. And then when all of this happened, and he was running again, there was a part of me that thought, gosh, it's not that I don't appreciate the things that Donald Trump has done, but I have issues with some of the things he did with inflation. I have issues with some of the things with the vaccine. I have issues with some of these things. But I still respect that even if I don't agree with him, some of the stuff in his personal life, I still regret that he is a man that has demonstrated that he is able to lead and to fight. And having served in the military, sometimes I served with people that I didn't agree with on moral issues. But in the midst of the fight, they had my back and I had theirs. So have I thrown out all of my moral codes? Have I just said, I don't care anymore about some of the things that Donald Trump has said or done in his past life or in his marriages? No. I still hold to those standards. I don't approve of those things. But I also recognize that we're in a fight. And what happened yesterday, from my perspective, was the culmination of a lot of events that led up to a particular vote where one party in this country has decided that they will vigorously go after somebody and use all the power of the state to do it because they perceive him as a threat, not to our democracy. They see him as a threat to them holding power. That's my concern. That's why for me, this is so much bigger than Donald Trump. It also gives me a certain degree of confidence that Trump, if elected, is going to fight back in ways that I think we actually need to. Now, does that mean I want to throw everything out with respect to the Constitution or rule of law? No, it doesn't. I am going to fight for the things that I swore an oath to. I'm going to fight for the things I believe to. I will always do that. But I am very tired, and as you are going to see today, there's a lot of other people that are very tired of this idea that there is one set of rules for us and another set of rules for them. And I think what the left needs to understand, and I'm not talking about people that might describe themselves as liberal. I'm talking about leftists. What they need to understand is what I said in the very end of that. You have showed us the rules of the game. And once upon a time, I used to be very, very comfortable sitting here trying to explain why those rules were bad, why what you were doing was going to lead to negative consequences. And you know what you have taught me? You don't know that the stove is hot. That's what you've taught me. You've taught me that I can't explain to you that if you do this, there will be negative consequences. There will be backlash. You aren't going to like it. And for the longest time, I've tried to say, well, I can reason with you. I can reason with you. You don't want to be reasoned with. You don't want to be reasoned with. And a good friend of ours once said, you read Hayek, you read Friedman, you read Mises, you read Bastiat, and you become a libertarian because you just want to be left alone. And then one day you discover they're never going to leave you alone. And then you become something else. Now, I didn't lose any of my commitments to my moral standings. I didn't lose any of my commitments to my political philosophy. But I will tell you this much. I'm tired of our side, of my constituents, the people that believe that we believe, who really do legitimately want to let you be free to live your own life, provided you don't try to impose it on us. I'm tired of us getting kicked around. And so we're going to fight back. That's what this is. That's what this represents. We are going to fight back. All right. So what does that look like? And why exactly are so many other people coming to this conclusion? And we're going to have some arguments that we make in here. We're also going to have some warnings. And I don't just mean warnings for the far left. I also mean warnings for our own side. Because there are things that we need to take into consideration with respect to what happens over the next several months, what happens to this election cycle, properly understanding who is really coming after us and who isn't. Because there still needs to be room for civil disagreement with people. But it needs to be with people that actually believe in civil disagreement. Not the people that one minute are going to burn everything down and then the next minute go off on a big morally charged rambling tirade about how we should all make sure that we're being careful. All right. So let's go into some of the things that we've been seeing again on social media. You've already heard my comments. My comments got quite the response. Keith Olbermann decided to come on. Keith Olbermann, of course, called me a fascist because he doesn't know what fascism is. If you don't know who Keith Olbermann is, that's fine. Keith Olbermann is the guy that proved that sportscasting is also something that Marxists suck at, right? That's Keith Olbermann's major contribution to the media. But what we want to talk about is some of the things that we have been seeing that are relevant. So let's talk about this. Christian, I know you've pulled up some stuff. Let's say we're talking to somebody right now that is watching this going, okay, I'm not a big, what they're saying is in their head is I'm not a big Trump fan, but I don't like what's going on. Can you please explain why I should have a problem with this ruling other than Trump's my guy?
Sure. So there's a couple points that there's many points that we're going to want to get across in today's live stream that we're doing. The first one is getting across to people just how egregious this really is. But I don't want to just end there, because I think one of the biggest problems that conservatives are facing is that for too often, conservatives have reacted to the left's excesses with simply, wow, imagine if the roles were reversed. Mm-hmm. I think this is kind of a Rubicon crossing moment, right? Where conservatives are realizing it's not simply enough to just say, imagine if the roles were reversed. There has to be retaliation. But in order for there to be retaliation in a way that's actually effective, we need to first understand how did they cross the Rubicon? Yeah. What is so egregious about this, and what makes this unprecedented in American history?
Because if you're watching MSNBC, your version of this is, well, yeah, Trump got caught paying hush money to somebody through his campaign. That's illegal. So why shouldn't he be convicted? So let's go through that. Let's go through that argument.
Here's some of the details. We've got two tweets that I want to go through that I think really encapsulate in a pretty dispassionate way what exactly was wrong here. This first tweet by this gentleman named Jonathan Pallison, and he says that it's just a random account that does a really good job of deconstructing, and I don't mean this in a Marxist sense, right? But, actual deconstructing what happened here, because there were a lot of people that weren't paying attention to the specifics of the trial, or a lot of people that were confused about the specifics, because there's a lot of complexity behind this. And so here's what he has to say. He says that the Trump prosecution was a mistake. It's important to have clarity of law. In the absence of this, the law can be wielded as a weapon against political enemies. And in this case, most people, journalists included, cannot even tell you what the allegations actually were. The charge was falsifying business records. But that in of itself is a misdemeanor, not a crime, and also the statute of limitations has expired. The prosecution instead charged Trump with falsifying business records with intent to aid and conceal another crime. But what was the other alleged object crime? Few people can answer this, and discordingly, it took me some research to even find out. The answer is that there are three different allegations regarding what the object crime is, and I will go through them below and give my comments.
Okay, so right off the bat, again, we're not hearing something from a Trump sycophant. We're hearing somebody that is, again, dedicated to rule of law and trying to explain what his problems are with this particular, why this would even went to trial in the first place, and the manner at which it's conducted. So let's go with the specific charges.
Number 1, tax fraud. Michael Cohen, received the money to be used for the hush payment from Trump as salary, and so he paid taxes on it. Thus, he paid too much in taxes, which is possibly illegal. Believe it or not, that was actually one of the arguments made.
Yeah.
And then he goes on to say, my comment is, even if this is illegal, it is A, silly, and B, probable that Trump would not know that it was illegal, which means it's not an example of him purposefully attempting to cover up a crime. Remember, he was charged not with a crime, because the statute of limitations for that had long since expired. Yeah. He was charged with attempting to cover up the commission of a crime that he was not charged with.
Yeah.
But if he's not aware that he's attempting to apparently cover up a crime, then how can you charge him with attempting to cover up a crime that he himself is not aware that he's trying to cover up? That's the first problem.
Not only that, but I'm old enough to remember that when they were considering prosecuting Hillary Clinton for deliberately setting up an entire server that was taking in classified documents, and she was shredding things and destroying servers and everything else, it was later determined that, well, we couldn't find any criminal intent on Hillary Clinton's part, therefore we're not going to prosecute. Even though they theoretically could have, but they had decided that, I think this was Comey, right? They had decided that, well, no, we haven't determined intent to commit a criminal act, and so therefore we're not going to do anything about it. Oh, so when it's setting up a separate server, which you're not allowed to do, in order to reclassify materials, I shouldn't say in order to, but classified materials went over to it, and that was known. That was not serious enough without criminal intent, but this definitely was, apparently.
Same thing with the classified documents case in Joe Biden's instance. Remember when the special counsel came out and said, well, he's a well-intentioned old man that has a poor memory.
Yeah.
That's another example of okay, so Democrats get off. But again, it's not enough to simply say, wow, what if the roles were reversed?
Yeah.
I'm not doing that. All that I'm trying to do here is explain to the audience what was so egregious about this case, so that way we can then get to, okay, so now that we know that that this should have never happened, what do we do about it? Because simply complaining about the injustice is not enough. We've been doing that for too long.
So that was the first point.
That's
the whole
the
idea
first
of
point.
Tax fraud.
Yeah. Second point, campaign finance law. Cohen paid an amount to Stormy Daniels larger than allowed individual contributions to a campaign. And then he goes on to elaborate that Cohen pleaded guilty to this in a separate trial related to himself. And then he goes on to say, my comment, it clearly actually wasn't a campaign contribution from Cohen personally, given that he was reimbursed. Point 3, New York election law. Conspiring to promote or prevent the election of any person to a public office by unlawful means. And then he goes on to say, and here are the unlawful means. They're 1 and 2, his first 2 points, right? Plus falsifying business records. No, the falsifying business records allegation was rejected by the judge as a possible object crime, but it was nonetheless allowed as a sub-element of object crime 3. And then he goes on to say, my comment. Number 3 relies on a charge that the court rejected as an object crime, and on 1 and 2, so it can't be much stronger of a case than those individual charges. Overall, my impression is that the allegations are weak and that Trump should not have been convicted. Furthermore, this case should not have been brought, and especially not in an election year.
And yet it was. I wonder what the motivation was.
What I find, what is so incredibly, egregious about this is one of the key points that the prosecution made is tax fraud for paying too much in taxes.
Yeah.
Since when is that a crime? And then, and again, they say it's in furtherance of another crime that we did not charge him with.
Yeah.
And in what universe can you say that Trump is aware that he's trying to cover up a crime that there's almost no way you can prove that he was aware that he was attempting to cover anything up that was criminal activity related to campaign finance law, and B, the entire court case is centered around a guy who was convicted and sent to prison for lying to prosecutors, and then you're going to use him as your chief witness in the case. Trump's defense pointed out the prosecution's entire case rests upon a man who is sentenced to prison for lying to law enforcement.
He was even caught lying during this case. He was caught in a lie. And according to a few people I was following, they were talking about part of his testimony not being allowed to be considered. But they were saying typically when a witness lies on the stand, they throw out the whole testimony.
Yes. So there's one more broader tweet that I want to go through that's a little bit longer, but I think that this actually is a solid explanation of why is this a crisis and how have we gotten to this point? And I think it'll lead to more branching conversations for the rest of this podcast. And this was put out last night by a guy in Silicon Valley, a venture capitalist that works for Sequoia Capital. His name is Sean McGuire. And he put out that he donated $300,000 to Trump's super PAC. This guy's loaded. He's a multi-millionaire. Yeah. And he wrote this long post, and I think it's worth going through this because he's a pretty neutral observer, and he talks about that in some ways this is crossing the Rubicon.
Part of what we're trying to identify here too is like, what is the impact going to be on this? Because we actually had an episode not that long ago where we were talking about the polls going on and how would a conviction impact all of that. We had another one talking about a lot of unrest within the United States and whether or not this would be some sort of catalyst for, wider conflict within the U.S. And so what I think is important to understand is that somebody can look at me and say, okay, Nick, maybe you weren't the biggest Trump fan, but you still voted for him twice. Right. So you saying that you're going to vote for him again, that's not some major departure. Right now, I don't think they're fully understanding what I'm actually saying to them. This isn't just about how I'm going to vote. It's about understanding exactly what you've been doing and how I'm not going to put up with this crap anymore. But like for other people, a lot of people have been saying, I didn't vote for him in 2016. I didn't vote for anybody in 2020, but I'm voting for Trump in 2024. And they're trying to dismiss all of this as though this is garbage. And an authority no less than I think James Carville actually got up on an interview once and said, look, guys, the lawfare isn't working. Just stop it and go out and campaign and beat them. But they can't help themselves. Like, this is the part that's so important to understand about how this is motivating people who, again, this guy is not he's not some Trump worshiper, right? He's not a Trump sycophant. So let's talk a little bit about his explanation for how this is impacting him.
Yeah, so this post by Sean McGuire is, I think, a fantastic encapsulation of where we are and how we got to this point. And this is coming from somebody who voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016 and did not vote for either Trump or Biden in 2020 and is now given $300,000 to Trump's super PAC. And so he goes on to say, I just donated $300,000 to Trump. I'm prepared to lose friends. Here's why. He works in Silicon Valley. Just remember that. And he says, back in 2016, I had drunk the media Kool-Aid and was scared out of my mind about Trump. As such, I donated to Hillary Clinton's campaign and voted for her. By 2020, I was disillusioned and didn't vote. I didn't like either option. Now, in 2024, I believe that this is one of the most important elections in my lifetime, and I'm supporting Trump. I know that I'll lose friends for this. Some will refuse to do business with me. The media will probably demonize me, and as they have so many others before me. But despite this, I still believe it's the right thing to do. I refuse to live in a society where people are afraid to speak. And then he goes on to say the 2016 election. I'm going to start off with something provocative, but I think it leads to a different take on on the most controversial Trump issue, which is probably January 6th. So here goes nothing. And then he says, and this is unpopular with people on the right, but he says, I believe the 2016 election was manipulated to hurt Hillary Clinton and to help Donald Trump. And then he goes on to say, hear him out for a second. I know that people might be upset. And he goes on to say, Hillary Clinton herself believes this, and she has denied the 2016 result dozens of times and still does to this day. Plot twist, I agree with her. Look into Guccifer 2.0, which was the hacker group that strategically leaked her emails through WikiLeaks in a drip campaign at just the right moments. It turns out it was the Russian GRU. And remember all those fake news and bot farms? These instances are the tip of the spear, and some of the publicly known incidents. There was an extreme manipulation happening during the 2016 election. Before proceeding, please watch at least 30 seconds of this video, and it's a video actually that I've watched before, and I think we've actually might have played on this podcast, where it's 24 minutes straight of Democrats denying election results.
Yeah.
I'm not going to play it, but then he goes on to say, I actually recommend that people look this up, though, when they get the chance. Then he goes on to say, Russia and others interfering in the 2016 election was nothing new. This happens in every election and everywhere in the world, obviously. But for me, as someone who used to work in national security, Russia's implicit support for Trump made me deathly afraid of him getting elected as president. I was wrong, and Russia miscalculated. Trump as president turned out to be a master of foreign policy and particularly strong towards Russia. If you've never seen this before, please watch this 2-minute clip from Trump at a NATO breakfast 5 years ago. If you're too lazy, Trump told Germany that A, they're owned by Russia via their energy dependence, B, they're financing Russia's war machine by buying their energy, C, they're not investing enough in defense, investing only 1% of GDP, which was below the 2% NATO commitment, while the US was investing 4.2% of GDP. And the world says he's owned by Russia? For other Trump foreign policy wins, he A, signed the Abraham Accords, B, successfully put Iran in the penalty box, which Biden's administration immediately unwound, and C, he helped India see the dangers of having their communications network controlled by China, resulting in Huawei and TikTok bans there.
Can I say something else on this? Here's what I've always found confusing about this idea that Trump's in the pocket of Putin, right? We have Obama on tape telling, one of, I can't remember, it wasn't Putin himself.
It was Dmitry.
Telling Dmitry, like, I'll have some more flexibility once the election season is over, right? Like, we have that on tape. And that wasn't considered to be anything, significant or mind-blowing or certainly not criminal. You also have Putin invading other countries for 3 of the last 4 presidencies. He invaded under Bush Sr., he invaded under, he invaded under Obama, and he invaded under Joe Biden. So what's the one presidency he never invaded anybody over? And that was Trump. Mm-hmm. Now, again, for all the people that was like, Trump's going to get us involved in World War III. And then I hear some people say, well, yeah, he didn't invade during Trump's presidency because he knew he had an ally. If he wanted the stuff he was invading and he thought Trump was an ally, why wouldn't he invade when his ally was? Why would he choose to invade when the big, tough Joe Biden that was going to show Putin a thing or two, why would he invade when that guy was in power? Like, these arguments don't make sense. They don't stand up to reason. The reason why a lot of countries around the world were a little bit less likely to screw with the Trump administration was because, quite frankly, they weren't really sure what he would do about it. Iran decided to F around, and they found out real quick, like, oh, he's not going to invade Iran, or he's not going to kick off another major war that we're going to be involved in for 20 years. No, what Trump will do is execute the general of Quds Force, right? Like, he will go after the top level people he ascertains as being responsible for the attack on Americans or America's allies, right? And this is where you also saw a complete difference within the posture. And again, this is not all because of Trump, but a lot of it is because of the approach that he took. This is why you saw certain Middle Eastern countries saying, we see Iran as a threat, and so the real threat right here is not Israel. The real threat to Sunni Muslims, the real threat to the legitimacy of the House of Saud and Saudi Arabia, the real threat is Iran trying to export its influence over the rest of the region and trying to dominate the Muslim world. That's the real threat. And again, understanding that and then fostering closer relations with other countries in the region to include those countries in Israel, that was significant. Yes. That was significant. They found a common enemy which could cause other people to put aside their differences and say, okay, this is the far greater threat to world safety, to our own peace and safety at home. And again, not saying that's all because of Donald Trump, but I also don't think you can completely deprive him of credit.
No, so, and this guy who voted for Hillary Clinton because he was worried about Russia being allied with Trump, after Trump took office, he ended up being pleasantly surprised at how Trump managed to handle things. And then he goes on to say, I'm not going to read this section, but he goes on to talk about his radicalization towards the center.
Yeah.
And he says that one of the big events that kind of pushed him over the edge into no longer identifying as a Democrat and supporting Democrats was the way that Biden handled the pullout of Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And then he goes on to continue to talk about the just incredible amount of global instability that we have around the world under the Biden administration. He references the October 7th attacks, and then he talks about the events of the Houthis targeting American ships in the Red Sea, and the Iranians sending drones and cruise missiles against the Israelis. And then obviously he brings up the invasion of Ukraine as well. And basically the point that he's trying to make is that the Biden administration has been rewarding countries like Iran, giving them free money at the same time that the world is kind of, burning down around us. And so then he continues back and he circles back around to getting into the double standards here, right? And he says, the next topic that has boiled my blood are the double standards and lawfare that Trump has faced. Here are some examples. And we forget about some of these examples at times, but it is actually worth remembering them right now to understand where we are right now as a country. And he says, classified documents. Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, Mike Pence, and Donald Trump were all caught with classified documents. Only Trump was indicted. Either it's a crime for all of them or none of them. All of the arguments about quantity of documents or obstruction are distractions to justify a double standard. Border wall. Remember how Trump was villainized for promoting a border wall? Biden has resumed building sections of it after pausing them, which the legacy media has been very quiet about. Election denialism. Yes, Trump denied the 2020 election results, but as we linked to above, so did Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden regarding the 2016 results, as have hundreds of other politicians since 2000. Either they're all election deniers or none of them. Corruption charges. Every inch has been searched for Trump corruption, while Joe Biden's involvement in foreign countries through Hunter has been swept under the rug. And then he goes on to list some examples that you can look at if you take a look at this thread yourself. And then he brings up 3 strikes for thee, but not for me. Joe Biden was the architect of the 1994 crime bill, which most attribute as the source of mass incarceration we saw over the next 2 decades, especially amongst black communities. Crack cocaine in particular was treated harshly when combined with the 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act. And then he says, and then he links a video that explains this. And then he points out that Hunter Biden will be locked up for life if the same rules were applied to him that Joe Biden has imposed on thousands of others. This is the tip of the double standard iceberg. And then he brings up the lawfare, which is where we're getting into the current legal troubles that Trump is finding himself in with the 4 indictments, one of which just resulted in a conviction. And he says, this is too broad of a topic to go into detail here, but suffice to say, I've spent hundreds of hours following the trials and researching the charges against Trump. This has been another radicalizing experience. I understand that normally when there's smoke, there's fire, but in this case, I think where there's smoke, there's lawfare. To anyone with a curious mind, I implore you to go deep on any of the charges against Trump, whether criminal or civil. Here's a very quick summary of the fishy aspects. Election interference case. Jack Smith was appointed special counsel to prosecute Trump. Jack Smith previously got the governor of Virginia. I
want to stop on this real quick because this is important. Jack Smith was the prosecutor that went after Bob McDonnell here in Virginia. Right. So Bob McDonnell was a very popular Republican governor. He was looked at as potentially being a presidential candidate. And they went after him and they destroyed his life. They certainly destroyed his political career. And it was all based around him supposedly taking gifts he wasn't supposed to. And here was the problem. Virginia's gift laws at that point, it's ethics laws or whatnot with respect to what a politician could receive in the form of like going to a dinner or stuff like that, was actually very lax. It was very lax. You can even argue that it was too lax, right? In fact, we changed them immediately following Governor McDonnell's indictment and subsequent prosecution. But here's the crazy part about all of it is that a lot of things looked bad about that, but the real question was, is it illegal? And lo and behold, the Obama Justice Department didn't seem to care a whole lot. Jack Smith sure as hell didn't seem to care a whole lot. And so they prosecuted him and got a conviction. Like he was going to jail. He had a date to report to jail. I mean, his marriage broke up as a result of it. Like it was horrible. I think he had to spend $3 million. And it's not as if he was an incredibly wealthy guy. He just wasn't. He had to spend $3 million defending himself, got prosecuted, was going to jail, and the Supreme Court, in a 9-0 decision, vacated the process, or I shouldn't say vacated, but they basically threw out the prosecution. They threw out the prosecution. Why? Because it turns out that even if you don't like what was done, it wasn't illegal. But you got to ask yourself, was that the point? What was the point of what Jack Smith was doing? Was the point of what the Department of Justice was doing? Was it to vigorously uphold the law? Or was it to destroy a potential political opponent?
Right. Bob McDonald was on the short list for VP at the time.
And he was rumored to consider running for president himself. The guy who wrote this actually brings up this point. He says, Jack Smith previously got the governor of Virginia convicted. He doesn't mention McDonald by name, but he says previously got the governor of Virginia convicted of corruption charges, which were then unanimously overturned by the Supreme Court. Basically, Jack Smith misled the jury. Why would you choose Jack Smith to be the special counsel for this case? Maybe if all you're trying to do is get charges to stick before an election, even if you know they'll be overturned subsequently by the Supreme Court. And then he goes on to say, the classified documents case. Once again, Jack Smith is the special counsel. And then he goes on to the Georgia election interference case. The Fulton County DA, Fannie Willis, has a history of corruption. It turns out that the outside lawyer she selected to prosecute Trump is someone she was having a romantic relationship with, Nathan Wade. That's a unique way to say having an affair with, by the way. Wade's law firm made about $700,000 after Willis appointed him. This was concealed. Wade has since resigned from the case, but Willis is still involved. And then he goes on to the hush money case. This is the one that Trump was just convicted on.
Yeah.
The key witness, Michael Cohen, is a proven liar. His testimony has been filled with contradiction after contradiction. And then the bank fraud case.
This bank fraud one, too. This is another one I want people to pay attention to because this one is mind-boggling. I mean, I look at this, and this is a classic case of well, I think this was just a judge ordered it, right? It wasn't even like... This is a classic case of we are looking for something to get you on for which there was no victim. There was no victim. I mean, it's hard to, and again, I don't think there was any crime either. But this is the part that we're talking about. When you look at some of the things that like Hunter Biden has done, when you look at some of the things that the Clintons have been implicated in, when you look at some of the things that Joe Biden himself has been implicated in with again, relevant testimony being offered by people to say, no, Joe Biden knew exactly what Hunter Biden was doing, and they were using the office as leverage in order to get these business deals and these transactions with like the Chinese government, right? Or Chinese companies that are essentially owned or controlled by the Chinese government. That was all just like, yeah, no big deal. You know what? We'll investigate. We'll look into it. But on something like this, where there's no victim, like literally the bank said, yeah, we gave him the loan because he's really good at this. Right. And the bank is actually responsible for doing its own analysis with respect to what the lender or the lendee puts up as potential collateral. It's the bank's job to analyze that. This happens every day in America where somebody says, hey, this is the property I'm offering as collateral. This is how much I think it's worth. And then the bank does its own estimate to determine, well, do we think it's worth that much or not? Or are we willing to take certain risks because this guy has a long track record of doing really good business deals? Like that's how this process works. And yet, they found it necessary to go through this whole legal process. So let's go ahead and explain a little bit more.
He says that Trump was ordered by Judge Engron to pay over $350 million in civil judgment that he committed bank fraud. This whole case reeked of corruption. This was an incident where no harm had been done. Banks had already been fully repaid with interest. The most important point in this case was Judge Engron arguing that Mar-a-Lago was worth only between $18 and $27.6 million when Trump said it was worth between $426.5 million and $612 million. Judge Engron tried to compare apples to oranges with an appraised value versus market value for a property that was very clearly worth something closer to Trump's range.
Here's another thing that's so frustrating about this, right? This is this idea that as a judge, he is somehow an expert on real estate prices. Like so let me get this straight. The judge, who presumably is not a real estate agent and knows very, very little about the real estate market within Florida. Now, obviously, he could go and talk to people about it, but you know who really needs to have their crap together before they hand out a massive loan with respect to what property might be worth? The bank that's handing out the loan. And here's the crazy part, right? Did all this happen because Donald Trump like defaulted all of this and the bank lost a bunch of money and people? Oh no, he did it. So he paid it back like with interest. And the bank was satisfied and Trump was satisfied and everybody in the transaction was essentially happy about what took place. Yep. But now a judge can just say, well, gosh, I know that's how everything happened, but
I don't think it's worth that
But I
much.
think you need to pay $350 million in damages. What? Like this reminds me of a quote from Justice J, where he essentially said that the ability to tax is ultimately the ability to destroy. Well, again, you're looking at something for where it's like, where's the crime? Well, the judge has decided there is one, and the judge decided there's damages, and the judge's going to go ahead and issue this. Okay, but $350 million for a transaction that hurt nobody, and again, it's very dubious that this would be illegal under any circumstances. Why are you doing that? Why are you doing that? Well, we know why he's doing it, because he wants to hurt him. That's why he's doing it.
The final one, sexual assault / E. Jean Carroll. The background to this case was almost unbelievable. For the audience that's listening to us right now, if you do not know the details of this case, this actually might set you over the edge. Yeah. I would argue in some ways this is actually worse than what just happened yesterday. He goes on to explain the details. In simple terms, a woman in 2019, E. Jean Carroll, came out and said that 20 years plus prior, in the late 1990s, Donald Trump had sexually assaulted her. The statute of limitations on this case had expired more than a decade prior to her claims. But the state of New York did something unprecedented and opened a 1-year window where people could file claims for sexual abuse going back to exactly the window when E. Jean Carroll accused him. So that's point number one. There was lawfare around the statute of limitations. Point number two is that this case was highly irregular, and ultimately, the jury determined that Trump did not rape E. Jean Carroll despite her claims, but they did determine that he sexually assaulted her, a lesser charge than rape. All of these cases are too complicated for most to follow, almost by design. As someone who has been following the cases closely, I've had the opposite reaction of what was intended. A, every single case seems to have had improprieties. And B, after going through Trump's entire life, if these are the worst things they can find, then he did no less wrong than I otherwise would have assumed.
No, he did less wrong than I otherwise would have
he did less wrong than I would have assumed. Fairness is one of my guiding principles in life, and simply these cases haven't been fair for Trump. The New York case is, quite frankly, that right there, the New York case alone is a sign that we're living in a post-constitutional society, because the Constitution talks about not about making it illegal for there to be ex post facto laws.
Yeah.
And when the state of New York, and it was obvious that this was politically motivated, this woman comes out and says, this guy raped me 20 years ago, which was really weird that right before his re-election bid, she does this. Why didn't she say it any point in the previous 20-something years before? Why didn't she say it when he ran the first time in 2016?
Well, if you look at so I'm gonna say this real quick. A lot of times, victims of sexual assault, victims of rape, don't come out until later. So I don't want it to be assumed that if a woman waits and doesn't say something immediately that there's a problem. The bigger issue with her is that there appear to be, like you've seen subsequent interviews with her where she's talking about rape as a fantasy and how that's how she thinks most people see it, and how she's celebrating about getting $83 million in a defamation lawsuit, and how she's going to buy the reporter she's talking to, a car. I forget what it was specifically. But there seems to be, and then you look at some of the other things that she talks about and does, and it's like, this does not seem like a mentally stable woman. Now, does that mean a mentally unstable woman can't be a victim of sexual assault? No. But when you look at all of the things adding up, it's like, wait a second. And an $83 million judgment for Trump saying, she's crazy, I didn't do this? Are you serious?
And the jury itself ruled that he actually did not rape her.
Yeah.
But again,
well, part of that is because she was also on record saying she wasn't sure if this happened or that happened. She couldn't be sure.
Again, the most egregious part of that entire case, though, was the fact that the state of New York changed the law in order to allow for this case to even exist in the first place. You want to talk about political interference, election interference. That is a perfect example.
Typically speaking, so again, I can speak to this as a legislator, and I can speak to it as someone that actually served on the Courts of Justice Committee in Virginia, where we handle criminal and civil law. Typically speaking, I'm not saying there can't be exceptions, but typically speaking, whenever you say we're going to adjust the statute of limitations, a lot of times that means from here on out. It's not retroactive, right? Because again, there's some obvious potential problems.
We saw this
with that.
happen during the Me Too movement. They opened up the statute of limitations further back so that people could bring charges against people from many, many, many years ago.
So this guy continues, and then he mentions things that he disagrees with, and he brings up that abortion is something that he disagrees with. He's pro-choice, whereas, Republicans tend to be pro-life. And, and he talks about, though, that other than abortion, I believe that Trump and the Republicans have been better on most domestic issues. Look at the quality of life in red states such as Florida and Texas versus the blue states like California, Oregon, and New York. I used to live in San Francisco and now live in Los Angeles. The crime and homelessness is out of control. We just talked about this in a previous podcast. Trump was villainized for his stance on building a border wall, but we've had about 10 million illegal immigrants cross into the U.S. already during Joe Biden's tenure. The Democrats have been trying to regulate technology, especially open source AI and crypto in ways that incentivize the best builders to build outside of America. 25 years ago, I believed the far right was vastly more dangerous than the far left. But today, I believe the far left, and especially Antifa, is more dangerous. Our attention and maintenance was on the far right while we ignored the far left. And then he goes on and he deals with the elephant in the room, which is the 2020 election in January 6th. And he says, now into the elephant in the room, the 2020 election. The topic was so taboo that if you talk about it, you're immediately canceled. I'm willing to wade into this fire. Some of us need to be willing to. I believe America has conflated two issues, the 2020 election itself and January 6th.
I think he's spot on with that.
Just as Hillary Clinton and dozens of other Democrats claimed the 2016 election was stolen, which I agree with. Remember, he agrees with Hillary on that, and he voted for her.
Yeah.
He then goes on to say, I believe there was a similar scale or even more interference in the 2020 election. We need to be able to talk about this, that way we can fix the problems. Democracy doesn't work without secure elections, but it also doesn't work without peaceful transitions of power. Both are essential. I believe there was extreme election interference, but I don't believe January 6th was the right response. Bear with me. So what was going on during the 2020 election? And then he says that he held top secret clearance for about 7 years and used to work in information warfare and also cybersecurity. I've seen nation state tactics that you can't imagine. It's from this lens and through access of lots of other non-public information through which I viewed the election. If you go back to the 2020 election, arguably the most sophisticated cyber attack in history was taking place. This was the SolarWinds supply chain attack. This attack was so sophisticated that it's impossible to know exactly what it was used for, and much of what we know has never been reported. Washington has an interesting phenomenon where when something incredibly damaging is learned, people oftentimes clam up and refuse to deal with it. I've seen this firsthand multiple hands now. But we also have things like the Hunter Biden laptop scandal, which the FBI was in possession of for roughly a year before the election. And despite it being easy to verify its authenticity, the FBI was actively telling Facebook and Twitter that it is fake news and they needed to recommend banning the sharing of a New York Post article about it.
Yeah, go ahead and stop right here. This is one, too, where I think a lot of people that were on the fence have come to the conclusion that it is. So I don't believe the 2016 election was stolen. Do I believe that there was foreign interference? Yes, because there's foreign interference in elections all the time. The question is as to what degree and what sort of impact can it possibly have. And I don't think the impact was significant enough to push it to Donald Trump, right? And we're not talking, when you talk about foreign interference as well, the thing you got to ask yourself is what exactly do you mean by that? Do you mean that a foreign government has an interest in a particular thing happening and then steals ballots or just buys a bunch of social media stuff? Right, those are two very, very different forms of interference, right? Secondly, when you look at the Department of Justice, right, the Department of Justice actively telling social media platforms, newspapers, that they are essentially you better not allow this to go out because we've determined it's Russian disinformation. Well, that has turned out to be a pretty obvious lie. I don't mean, oh, they got it wrong. I don't mean like, oh, they were confused.
You want to talk about intimidation, though?
This was an obvious lie where the Department of Justice decided to intimidate social media platforms in order to not report on a story that was absolutely relevant to the election. Our own Department of Justice. Let me ask you something. What's worse? The Russian government buying up ads for social media or using bot accounts or whatnot to try to give an impression of what's actually going on within the United States, or our own Department of Justice going to a social media company and other outlets and essentially threatening them if they don't take stuff down or engage in censorship? Which do you... I pose it to you, threat to democracy crowd. Which do you think is worse? Dealing with a foreign adversary that we already knows is trying to influence our elections and our processes and the way we think about things, or our own government interfering in something like that? Which is worse?
The deep state is real. The deep state is absolutely real. And he goes on to say there were many other issues. Not at least was a global pandemic that almost certainly leaked from a Chinese lab, but we aren't allowed to talk about that either, nor the mail-in ballot issues. My point is that the 2020 election, my point to the 2020 election and say there's no smoking gun evidence, so therefore there was no public interference. Many point to the 2020 election and say that there's no smoking gun evidence, so therefore there was no interference. My retort is that there's no public evidence. And in general, the DoD/intelligence community is afraid to push too far on the issue, knowing how damaging it would be to find interference. There's things they can't say. The end result is a 2020 election where Biden and Trump combined received 155 million votes versus the 128 million combined for Hillary and Trump in 2016. That's 26.7 million more votes in 2020 compared to 2016. That's a 20% increase in voter turnout in a period where the population only grew by a few percent. In an election where people weren't inspired by either candidate and where there was more voting friction than ever before due to COVID-19. Personally, I don't think it's fair for Hillary Clinton to be able to claim the 2016 election was stolen, but Donald Trump to be indicted for the same thing. Regarding the January 6th protests, I don't agree with them. Even if an election is stolen, I think the correct democratic response is to, and this is a part where I and many other Republicans might disagree, but this is his take. Just understand that for the audience. He says, even if an election is stolen, I think the correct democratic response is to accept it, have peaceful transition of power, and then fight like hell on the back end to make sure it never happens again. Regarding Trump's involvement in January 6th, the clearest thing he did was deny the election results. But again, so did Hillary Clinton. So if this isn't a crime in of itself, then what else did he do? The rest is fuzzy. There is conflicting testimony, especially around when the National Guard was requested. On one hand, you had the testimonies of General Flynn and Walter Piatt, but on the other, you had the testimony of Colonel Earl Matthews, Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, and the head of Capitol Police at the time, Stephen Sund. The media reports on Trump's January 6th involvement in absolute terms, but again, if you go deeper, it's unclear. For me, if Trump actually asked for the National Guard to be ready to go during January 6th, it's a major counterpoint against allegations that he was inciting an insurrection. And then here's his summary. He says, in summary, in 2016, there were two primary reasons I voted for Hillary Clinton. I was deathly afraid of Trump. One, Russia was helping him in the election by hurting Hillary Clinton. This made me susceptible to the media narrative that he's owned by Russia and will be a foreign policy disaster. Two, candidly, the clip where he said, grab him by the new you-know-what, I'm not going to read it out loud, deeply bothered me. These two things built a pattern in my mind that Trump was out of control. But now, with the benefit of hindsight, revisiting these 2 points, one, to my shock, I believe Trump was one of the best foreign policy presidents in decades, and during the most complex period and in almost a century, as the East rises, which leads to a changing set of rules. Two, that clip still sits in the back of my mind, but I personally consider the double standards of lawfare against Trump to be 10 times worse and 10 times more dangerous for our democracy. So what's next? Do I agree with Trump on everything? Of course not. And then he lists some of the things that he disagrees on.
Yeah.
But the point is that here's the very end, the conclusion. Don't speak up. Don't be silenced. Freedom of speech is worth nothing if we're afraid to use it. We cannot let cancel culture win. There's no greater country in the world than America, but America has had a bad decade. America is blessed with a robust constitution, abundant natural resources, and diverse people. The way out from here is by focusing on our strengths. And he says that their liberalism and hard work, we need to start building again. Best of luck, President Trump. I'm starting to think liberalism is not our strength; it's our weakness.
Well, here's what I would say. This is where the whole argument comes down between classical liberalism, which we've always, I shouldn't say aspired to, but which we've always connected ourselves with intellectually, like classical liberalism in the sense of, again, individual liberty, limited constitutional government, property rights, free markets, self-determination. All of these things have been associated with what you would call classical liberalism. And then you have modern liberalism, right? And modern liberalism purported to respect things like property rights, free elections, generally free markets, even though it wanted a larger role for government. And then it was also this idea of greater equality. But the problem is that what we've seen over and over again is that leftism and when I say leftism, what I mean is an ideology rooted in some of the core tenets of Karl Marx. That doesn't mean they're all Marxists. It just means it's rooted in core tenets of Marxism. A lot of it comes from the Frankfurt School. Some of it is kind of a coalescing of critical theory from the Frankfurt School along with postmodernism, existentialism, all these other things, right? All these other concepts. They liked the idea that liberalism could be used to consolidate power for leftists. But what you quickly end up realizing is that liberalism is not their goal. Power is the goal. And it's stuff like this that makes it very, very obvious, right? It's the stuff that we're discussing that makes it very, very obvious that it's like, this is not about some sort of larger commitment to the general rule of law. The same people that are constantly saying that our justice system is an absolute joke and racist and sexist and bigoted are now coming back and saying, oh, but we really like this result, so it's wonderful. The very same thing that we're being accused of, oh, you don't like the result against Trump, and so therefore you don't really care about a fair justice system. No, we do, because we're not just saying we don't like that you prosecuted Trump. We don't like the reasons you chose. We don't like the evidence that you tried to manipulate. We don't like the fact that the same things that you would have looked at with the Clintons or the Bidens and would have dismissed out of hand as not being that important or not a big deal, or I don't know, move on, right? The same things you look at there, when it's Trump, all of a sudden it's like, nope, we're going to throw the book at him. We're going to find every potential way that we can prosecute him, and we're going to throw everything at the wall and hope something sticks. And if we got to make crap up, we'll do it. That's the part where it's like, no, that's not the criminal justice system that we acknowledge. That's not the processes that we're supposed to be doing. And I want to switch over to this point here about Alvin Bragg, right? This is the man that prosecuted Donald Trump, essentially ran on prosecuting Donald Trump. By the way, when Alvin Bragg took over as the district attorney, his own mayor and police commissioner, the mayor and police commissioner of New York City, were so concerned about his day one memo that he put out that the police commissioner, which again is not a hardcore Trump supporting conservative, came out and said, we have some very, very serious concerns about how this is going to relate to the overall safety of New Yorkers. So I want to read this from City Journal. It says, in his now infamous day one memo, new Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, this is from 2022. Alvin Bragg sets out a number of controversial directives such as non-prosecution of crimes including resisting arrest, trespassing, fare evasion, and prostitution. Bragg's office would broadly reduce charges for crimes including knife point robbery, commercial and some residential burglaries, weapons possession, and low-level drug dealing, whatever that is. There will be a presumption of no jail time for almost any crime, and sentences of life without parole will be banned even for cop killers barring exceptional circumstances. Over the last 2 years, the number of shooting victims citywide doubled, while car thefts rose 92%. Murders rose by almost half in 2020, and then rose again, even as clearance rates for murders dropped from 86% at the end of 2019 to 46% at the end of 2020. In 2021, hate crimes nearly doubled. Non-rape sex crimes rose by almost a third. Yet Bragg believes that criminal offenders are less likely to commit more crimes if they avoid jail time or heavy sentencing and get diverted into drug treatment or mental health programs. His vision of public safety emphasizes sympathetic and trusting treatment of criminals and downplays the risk of future victims. This is the guy. So if you're wondering where this guy's priorities were, it wasn't with preventing violent crime. It wasn't with trying to make sure that average New Yorkers are safe on their subway or getting to work or in their place of residence or not getting their belongings stolen from them. No, this guy deprioritized all of those things. But this, oh man, this is what he was going to go after. This is what the resources of the New York District Attorney's Office was going to be fully committed toward. And you're telling me, honestly, you're going to look at me with a straight leftist. You're going to look at me with a straight face and say, oh yeah, no, this is a much better priority. Give me a break. Just give me, you don't get to lecture us on logical consistency with respect to upholding the rule of law when you have so little regard for it when it comes to average citizens getting hurt, beaten, robbed, assaulted, and you just dismiss it. Well, those are just flaws of society. Oh, but we have a political opponent that we can go after? Throw the book at him. Everything you got. Everything you got. This is the part where
you're supposed to be able to get a fair. Basically, we're supposed to trust that we have a jury. We have a right to have a jury of our peers, right? Tell me how the former president, Republican president of the United States, gets a jury of his peers in an 87% Democrat district. Manhattan, 87%.
Oh,
Democrat.
I thought it was more. I'm going to look up real quick.
I was looking it
actually.
up, but it looked like 87. But I could be wrong. But maybe it is more than that. What I'm trying to say is Republican president, almost 90% Democrat area. You really think he's going to get a fair trial out of that? Everybody who was watching this trial take place and spending time in the courtroom was saying there is no way they can really come to this conclusion.
You were right, by the way.
Of course they did. Yeah.
Joe Biden got 87% in New York County, which is synonymous with Manhattan. Although I believe where this trial actually took place, it was more like 90%.
Okay. Well, either way, my point is made is that it's insane. How in the world do you get an even jury?
You know what's also incredible is that there was one out of the entire jury pool, there was one person who said that they had voted for Trump in a past election. I don't even know if it was 2020. Well, and then they recused themselves from the jury pool because they came out and said, "Well, I don't know if I can be impartial."
Let's talk
but
about
everybody else is impartial.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit. Well, because again. Republicans and conservatives in general tend to have this idea that I overall trust our justice system. I know it's not perfect, but I trust it. And if I was a Trump supporter and we've got a case with Trump, well, then maybe I'm not the best person to preside on that jury because we want a fair and impartial jury. You think any Democrat, you think any Hillary supporter, you think any Biden supporter in that jury had any qualms about being on that jury?
Did any of them recuse themselves?
I mean, the judge's daughter certainly didn't have any problem with actively working with organizations to keep Trump off the ballot. Not only this.
The judge donated to Joe Biden that presided over the case.
Can we also talk about the instructions he gave to the jury?
Yes. Bring that up, please.
Their decision didn't have to be unanimous.
So here was the issue, is that there was 34 counts. Now, people are going to say it doesn't matter because he got convicted on all 34. But the problem is that the judge gave instructions to the jury. And again, I'm not claiming to be a legal expert. This just sounds really fishy to me. And he said that if 4 jurors find him guilty on these 3 counts and 4 jurors find him guilty on these other 3 counts and 4 jurors find him or whatever on these other 3 counts, that's going to be a conviction across the board. It's like, whoa, wait a second. I thought you had to have a unanimous decision on each count. Now, you could say we're unanimous on these 3, but not on these other ones. But you can't say, well, Joey here thought he was guilty of the 12th count, and Stevie over here thought he was guilty of the 1st count. But you don't have a unanimous decision on any of the counts? Like, that was, again, not saying that's what actually happened.
But that's how the judge instructed the jury.
But that was how the judge gave the instructions. And you're telling me that, wait, does that sound right? Like, I don't think so.
The last couple things that I want to bring up before we move to what's going to be the fallout and impact of this is just to really drive the point home. If you have not yet been convinced about how rigged this was, and I'm going to use that word, this was rigged from the start. This entire thing should have never happened. Here's a tweet from Molly Hemingway where she says, Joe Biden's number 3 at the DOJ ran the trial, but you're not supposed to say that Joe Biden has any role in the Biden campaign strategy of imposing its political opponent with coordinated lawfare across various Democrat-run jurisdictions. And she's quote tweeting somebody who says, here he is, Matthew Colangelo, former DNC political consultant who left his job as the third-ranking official at Biden's DOJ in December 2022 to take a lesser job in Manhattan's DA Alvin Bragg's office as senior counsel in the criminal case against Trump.
I'm sure that's just a coincidence. I'm sure that's just a coincidence. He was just looking for a demotion, and this one seemed to like, you know, fit the bill. Like I'm sure that's what happened. All right, I want to say one other thing here, and this is a Thomas Sowell quote that I love, and I think I'm going to share on Twitter right now. It says, there is no greater indictment of judges than the fact that honest people are afraid to go into court while criminals swagger out of its revolving doors.
Have you seen some of the tweets that were like, Donald Trump is the only person to have been convicted of anything in a New York court this year? Because they don't enforce the rule of law in New York City.
Yeah, that's the point, right? Well, look, Christian, to be fair, you know, Alvin Bragg is a little bit too difficult to prosecute people for violent crimes against innocent citizens right now because he's going after Trump. You're not going to get elected mayor of New York City or governor of New York by actually, like, you know, cleaning up the streets of New York. No, you're going to get that by going after Donald Trump, right? That has so much more political value than actually, I don't know, doing your job, right?
Well, he's trying to secure his key voting demographic, which are criminals. I mean, people who don't really care about the rule of law. Those are his voting demographics. So, of course, he's going to reduce all of these things and not give people extra felonies on their record or anything like that because he wants them to still be able to vote for him.
Yeah, no, I think, again, if anybody was wondering, right, why are people on the right? And now, look, let's be honest, right? There's some people that are so consumed with Donald Trump that the moment you say anything bad about him, the moment you question anything with him, they treat you like a heretic. And I have to be honest, it's one of the things that I found most off-putting about some of the things with the initial Trump campaign was the people that, again, would look at me and act like I was the bad guy because I wasn't fully on board with this guy who hadn't even done anything yet, right? Other than slam Rosie O'Donnell and make some promises. And that's one of the things I would tell. That's one of the things I would tell some of the people that, again, hardcore Trump supporters. I totally get it. Don't be too harsh on the people that were skeptical, because we had reasons. And the fact that a lot of us, like on my initial tweet, a lot of us are coming around now, and like, okay, like my coffee mug, convict around and find out, right? We're at the point right now where, again, we understand that. And it's not like we didn't understand that there was problems and corruptions before. It was a question of who's the best person to deal with that, right? Who is going to be the most faithful and fighting it? And again, I think Donald Trump proved a lot during his first term. And I think the left has proven a lot by the way that they've gone after him. And so that's where we're at right now. We're at this point where it's like, you know, we can sit here and bicker all day long about, well, you know, I wish he was a little bit better on tariffs, or, you know, I wish he was a little bit better. I wish he hadn't pushed this one policy as much, or I wish he hadn't done that, or, you know what, I wish he hadn't, you know, had the relationship issues that he's had with his wives in the past and things like that. Sure, fine. But the fight right now is the fight right now. And my question is Donald Trump willing to fight it? And the answer is yes. Not to mention the fact that after everything he's gone through, I highly doubt he's going to waltz back into the White House and be like, hey guys, you know, look, you know, we don't want to, you know, engage in mean behavior. He needs to fire
absolutely everybody.
He needs to go back in and look at the bureaucracy and be like, yeah, bad news.
Because last time he came in, he kept a lot of the appointees from Biden, and it's just usually, or not Biden, sorry, Obama. And it's usually just accepted that this is just the way it goes. You know, this administration puts these people in, the next administration kind of has to deal with it. And, you know, it's just the way it's done. No, he needs to just take an axe to absolutely everything in there and put all new people in.
So now we're going to get to what are we going to do about it? Because it's not enough for conservatives to say, wow, imagine if the roles were reversed.
Yeah.
We've been saying that for decades at this point.
Yeah.
And look at where we are now. So the days of strongly worded conservatism, I think are well and truly over. And if you want any proof of that, just go on Twitter. Sorry, X, right? Like, I mean, some of the people out there have been pointing out kind of the obvious lately. For example, here's a tweet from Michael Knowles. Good thing we didn't prosecute Hillary. If we had exercised that power then, imagine what would have happened when the Democrats came into office.
Yeah.
Here's a tweet from Matt Walsh.
Oh, Matt didn't hold back.
Thank God nobody ever actually followed through on the lock her up chance and charged Hillary with any crimes. If we had strayed outside of the norms like that, Democrats might have done something drastic when they took power. Think of the norms. We must always protect the norms. Here's a transcript from Megyn Kelly, because I'm not going to play the audio, but I will read a portion of what she said last night. She on her own show came out and said some pretty stark stuff, and she said that, you know.
Well, keep in mind, Megyn Kelly and Donald Trump in 2016 couldn't stand each other.
Had
did not get
falling
along.
out.
Could not stand each other.
And she says this whole scheme, and here's the proper word, is corrupt. It's a before and after moment for America. What just happened today is a line we can't uncross, and these Democrats will rue the day they decided to use lawfare to stop a presidential candidate. I'm not talking about violence. I'm talking about tit for tat. You just wait. It won't be Hunter Biden next time. It's going to be Joe Biden. It could potentially still be Barack Obama. It could potentially still be Hillary Clinton. We're going to have to look at what the statute of limitations are on the various crimes they surely committed. We're going to have to look at passing laws to revive those dead crimes, felonies, or misdemeanors so that those cases can be brought out of time. That's exactly what they did to Donald Trump in New York. This is what may be in the interest of justice, just like they did for E.J. Carroll with the New York State law that was passed so that she could sue him. That's what happened. Turnabout is fair play. And John Yoo, an amazing lawyer who worked in the Bush administration Department of Justice, has a great piece out today talking about how that's the only way they'll learn. It's the only way to save, then she concludes with, the only way to save the republic now is to give them a taste of their own medicine. That's it. That's it. They tasted blood today. They're the wolves with the bloody piece of meat in their mouths. It doesn't stop with the wolf, coming, that doesn't stop the wolf from coming back for more. The only thing that it will stop him is if he loses a limb of his own. I'm sorry, but the Democrats started this game. It's the same way the Republicans upped the ante when it came to, for example, the filibuster fight. The Democrats got rid of it for lower court judges. Mitch McConnell said you will rue the day because we are going to be in control of this chamber one day, and you are going to lose the filibuster at the higher court level. And then you'll be sorry. That's what needs to happen here. Who's getting indicted next? Joe Biden? Maybe Jill Biden? How low can we go? You may not want to see it, but that ship has already left port. The horse has left the barn. That's where we're going. So before you celebrate too much over at MSNBC and CNN, who are positively gleeful over this absurd conviction, you wait and ask yourself what kind of Pandora's box has been opened here.
I want to point something out because as soon as I saw that John Yoo wrote that, I was like, oh, good. Let me go look it up. I want to see what article he wrote. So I typed it into Google. First one is Media Matters for America. Left-wing hack place. Next one is New York Magazine, and the title is John Yoo demands revenge prosecutions. Then the University of Chicago Press interview with John Yoo. That one is actually, but again, I think this was an older one. Then it's John Yoo and the Problem of Constitutional Evil. That's from 2008. John Yoo's Tortured Logic, The Nation. So they're going through and it's like, look, I'm trying to look for something that was just referenced. Why can't I find it anywhere?
Yeah, Google's pretty terrible.
But and that's another thing too, that when we look at the way that our search engines operate, once again, it is designed to achieve a particular outcome. It is designed to achieve a particular outcome, and you're not going to convince me that that's not politically motivated when you look at the staff of Google. When you look at the staff of most of social media, with the exception of X and Rumble. But that's never interference because it's a private company just doing what they want. Okay. Fine.
So again, we are far past the Rubicon has been crossed. We are far past the point where it's, wow, imagine if the roles were reversed. They came for our presidential nominee in an election year. This isn't even like 2016 where it's like they tried to rig the 2016 election as well, but at least they were trying to do it behind the scenes. No, in this case, they're trying to throw our guy in prison.
Yeah.
Well, if nothing more, maybe not prison, right? Maybe they know that prison isn't possible. But even if he's under probation and they have, a probation officer that he has to check in with, he's got to do meetings, surprise checks, everything. Every time he tries to leave the state, a certain mile radius, he's got to check with his parole officer. His parole officer's got to, probation officer. Yeah. And the probation officer's got to approve it. Oh, by the way, this probation officer is a 90% likelihood they're a Democrat and have an axe to grind. So if nothing bigger, it's at least to keep him from going out and campaigning.
Yeah. It's to interfere with his ability to campaign.
Right.
That's what trying to do these enormous fees against him. They're trying to drain his bank accounts. They're trying to prevent him from being able to get out and actually campaign. They're trying to do all of these things. Like the convictions, they love to get them, but I don't even know that if it's the primary objective, if it's just about keeping him from being president. The problem is, and this goes back to what do we do about it now? I think James Carville tried to warn him that the lawfare wasn't working. And part of the reason why is because when you attempt to use logically consistent arguments, what people look for is logical consistency in the people making the argument. So, does the left use logical consistency when making their arguments? The answer is no, they don't. I have some colleagues in the General Assembly who are Democrats that when they get up to make an argument, they will make a logically consistent argument. I may disagree with their conclusions. I may disagree with the way that they analyze the data, but I will tell you right now, that is the vast minority. The majority of them are very, very fine to attempt to make a logically consistent argument until it doesn't serve them well, and then you're a bigot, a racist, a sexist, a transphobe, or whatever else. Whatever else you have to be tarred and feather with to get people to stop listening to you. And they're perfectly fine with that. Perfectly fine. It's the same thing with respect to the use of standards. If you're going to judge one side by a particular standard, fair play says you judge the other side by a particular standard. Here is what conservatives in general have known for a while to be true, but now it has manifested itself in something just so outrageous that something's broken. Something has been broken and the left doesn't get it yet because the left is so used to the right saying, yes, but we love these institutions. Yes, but we love these ideas and these philosophies, and we have to be careful. We can't stray too far from them or else bad things happen. And the problem is that when you demonstrate a willingness to completely throw out the rules when they no longer suit you, when your commitment to institutions was not based off of the nobility or the importance of the institutions, but rather its utility for your objective to seize power, after a while, people come to the conclusion, which I admit is a very dangerous conclusion, it's one we've warned about, that fine, if the institutions are nothing more than a tool in order to achieve power, well, I'm sure as hell not going to let my enemies have it. That's what you're doing. That is what arguably you have done. And what I don't think the left is even ready to anticipate at this point is what happens when the other starts playing by the rules you've set.
I'll tell you what happens. Here's what Sean Davis and Matt Walsh put out. And these are prominent figures that are by no means big-time MAGA men. In fact, Matt Walsh ruthlessly attacked Donald Trump in 2016. Sean Davis is the founder of The Federalist. Matt Walsh is, a popular host on the Daily Wire. They have very large followings within conservative circles, but both of them for a long time have usually been considered on the more liberty conservative wing. They're not establishment figures, they're conservatives, but they were always principled conservatives, right? They would always talk about upholding the Constitution and the rule of law and these institutions and legal norms. Sean Davis put out this last night. If you're a Republican running for office, you can just go ahead and throw away all of your little elegant policy proposals for this or that corporate exclusion or tax subsidy. Give me a list of which Democrat officials you are going to put in prison or get lost. There is only one way to deal with nuclear war, which is what Democrats have unleashed, and that is mutually assured destruction. Democrats declared war on our entire system of justice and the rule of law, and our only options are victory or defeat. I intend to win. Do you?
Yeah.
Matt Walsh said something somewhat similar. He said, I don't want to hear elected Republicans complaining. I don't need to see their tweets and statements condemning the verdict. The only thing I want to hear from these people is which Democrats we will have arrested. Do not tell us that you're sad about the verdict. We don't give a expletive about your feelings. We want to see corrupt Democrats frog marched on camera in handcuffs. If you don't do that, then shut up. And he's gotten 55,000 likes on that so far.
Yeah.
He put that out this morning, actually. It wasn't even last night. It was just a few hours ago. This is where we're at. And we've warned about it on this podcast, that a day will come where the extra constitutional actions that the left has been engaged in for decades at this point will one day come back to haunt them. And now we're at a point where conservatives of all people are coming to the realization that the Constitution is a dead letter. And the left has realized that for a long time. The difference is the left said it with glee. Conservatives are saying it with sorrow. But you know what? It doesn't matter how the Constitution died and whether or not you're happy about it. We are living in a post-constitutional society when a former president and current candidate for a major party is being dragged through the legal system in 5 cases. And we went through earlier in this live stream, every single one of those 5 cases is itself a perversion of the law. Every single one of them, not a single one of them would be tried if his name was Donald Smith and he was, living in the middle of Kansas, living a quiet, peaceful life. But because his name is Donald Trump and he's a former president and potential current future president, they're trying to utterly destroy him. Nick and I, you and I, we talk a lot about history, right? You and I have like all these deep discussions, and I wrote something a few days ago, conveniently right before this ruling, and I decided to reshare it because I think it's kind of timely with the circumstances of where we're at. And I said, the left has no idea what's coming, but plenty of those who have studied history do. For all the talk among resist libs about Trump being a fascist dictator for 4 years, he did not cross the Rubicon during his presidency. And what happened after he left office? They tried to bar him from running again. They raided his house. They indicted him on politically motivated charges. They fined him nearly $500 million, and they're now seeking to throw him in prison. Trump is effectively a Grokkai brother who is now paying for his life for the price of crossing the regime. And like the Roman senatorial elite who slaughtered Tiberius and Gaius, the current powers that be truly believe that if they simply crush Donald Trump, our democracy will be saved and they will retain political power indefinitely. No, all you've done is taught the right a simple lesson about what happens when even the tamest of opposition, or what happens to even the tamest of opposition to the left-wing Leviathan. The left first raised the stakes by consolidating as much power as they could in DC. Then they raised the stakes even higher by making it clear that compromise and coexistence are illusions and that one side must win. Now the stakes are so unimaginably high that to seek even basic policy changes requires a crossing of the Rubicon. The lesson is simple. History tells us what kind of man will arise to challenge the regime next time. He won't be a Grokkai. He will be a Sulla.
So to give everyone the historical reference for that, we've considered several times now doing an episode on, we've considered titling it Cincinnatus, Sulla, or Caesar. And the reason why is that if you look at the Roman Republic, early on there was a crisis, and there was a man named Cincinnatus that was given power within the Roman system in order to put down a revolt and basically restore the republic. And he came out of retirement, took the power, put down the revolt, and immediately went back to his farm. It's one of the reasons why there was an organization of officers from the Continental Army that they called I think it was the Society of Cincinnatus. And Washington was compared to a Cincinnatus because he had the power and control of the Continental Army to assume a greater degree of power and didn't do it. Sulla, I mean, most people kind of know what Caesar did. Most people, I would argue, probably don't know who Sulla was. And Sulla was a Roman general who essentially seized power illegally and then attempted to correct the problems and corruption that were going on within the Roman government. He actually set up some good policies. He achieved some good things. The problem was that at that point, the genie was out of the bottle because he used force in order to correct for the things that were going on. And then he desperately tried to pass a bunch of laws and rules and restrictions and regulations that would make it impossible for anyone to do what Sulla had done. But the problem was again, the genie was out of the bottle, using force in that way in order to achieve it. It's one of the reasons why I have been so concerned about all of this, because I don't want that. I don't want that. And history suggests to me that it always goes down a path where it's incredibly hard to stop it. And I'll be honest, I'm still committed to not wanting a Sulla. I don't want that to happen. I want us to be able to, I want a Cincinnatus. I want to be able to fix it within the framework that we have. But I will say that I don't think it's going to be possible to do that without people that understand what the fight is, right? If anybody is asking why all of a sudden I've gone to this point where I'm enthusiastic about Donald Trump, it's because if nothing else, right? I don't need to agree with him on all of his trade policy. I don't need to agree with him on his ethics with respect to being a husband. I need someone that understands what this fight is really about, and I think he does because he's been the target of so much of it. That's what it comes down to. Because the alternative is the Mitt Romney approach.
The aw shucks conservatism.
I can't tell you how frustrated I am, and I see this. I can't tell you how frustrated I am with these conservatives where I'm looking at them going, what exactly do you plan to conserve? Because as far as I can tell, the only thing you want to conserve is whatever the progressive agenda was 10 years ago. And we've talked about this before with the Hegelian dialectic, right? It's this idea, look at it this way. There's a left-wing position, there's a right-wing position. And then a compromise takes place. And inevitably, because the left wants more power and the right wants to be left alone, the left gets more of what they want in the compromise. But maybe you're saying to yourself, well, that's okay. The compromise is the new normal. This is what it is to live in civilization. And we have the compromise, and that's the new normal. Except it isn't. It's not the new normal. You want to know what it becomes? The right-wing position. It becomes the right-wing position. The thing you're conserving is the compromise. Well, what happens when now the left shows up with a new demand? Now where's your starting point for compromise? The previous compromise.
This is why conservatism is progressivism driving the speed limit, as they say.
Yeah.
And this is also why conservatism can't actually conserve anything. This is also why the response whenever anything like this happens is that conservatives always respond with, imagine if the roles were reversed.
Yeah.
But
we're done with that.
Eventually, the right is going to stop asking if the roles were reversed, and they're going to reverse the roles.
Well, and the thing is that we've got a very, very, I believe we have a very, very limited window to still be able to do the Cincinnatus approach. Like, that's what I'm fighting for. That's what I am all in for. All right, we got some questions here from the audience. We got one from Lord Croak, a super chat. Thank you very much for that. This podcast has helped shape my political standing. Question: how do we go about talking to random people to spread the word and not be attacked? So here's what I would tell you on that.
You're going to be attacked.
Here's what I'm going to, first of all, you need to start getting comfortable with the fact that you're going to be attacked. You're not going to be popular for some of this, that there may be certain friendships that suffer as a result. But here's what I can tell you. The friendships that are genuinely worth preserving can allow for two people to civilly disagree about something, provided that one side of that conversation doesn't insist on dominating the other. Right? This has always been our position, right? Like, I want you to be free to live your life the way you want, provided you don't infringe on other people's freedoms. And anybody that agrees with that core tenet, right? Maybe it manifests itself in different ways, but anybody who agrees with that core tenet, that's someone that I can maintain a peaceful relationship with, even a friendly one with. But if their position is, no, I want more of your stuff, or I want you to be restricted, or I want to tell you what to do with your life, or I want to tell you what's going to go into your kid's school library, and they will not, no, I'm sorry, that might not be a friendship worth preserving. Because is it really a friendship when somebody essentially insists that you see it their way and you do it the way they want, or they're going to punish you for it? And they think that all of a sudden the punishment is perfectly acceptable because they went through a political process to achieve it? So that's the first thing that you're going to have to get used to. I mean, look, my Christian faith is first. And so there's this verse from Paul where he says that insomuch as it is within your ability, live in peace with everyone. Insomuch as it is in your ability. But the moment they start insisting on oppressing or imposing, at some point you're going to have to decide. At some point you're going to have to decide. And so the real question now is where are you going to foster the relationships? Where are you going to foster the friendships? Again, I am willing to have a friendly conversation with anybody that is willing to be reasonable. What does reasonable mean? It doesn't mean you have to agree with me on everything, but we do have to agree on certain core tenets about reality. Do you believe in the laws of logic? Do you believe in rationality and empiricism? Do you believe in that there is such a thing as objective moral reality? If you can believe in those things, we can have a discussion. If you don't, then inevitably this is just a question of power. And so that's what I would tell you is that I am always willing to start the conversation, not assuming ill intent and assuming that we can actually get to an agreed upon end state. But the moment someone starts to shift the goalposts, and I don't mean with respect to their outcomes, I mean with respect to the way we even think about reality. The moment they're willing to have a peaceful conversation all the way up into the point where they start to lose, and then all of a sudden you're just a bigot, you're just a racist, you're just a sexist, you're just an oppressor, you're just a colonizer, I'm going to tell you right now, that's a good indication that's probably someone that is going to have to learn the hard way. You might not be able to convince them of it. So focus your time on the people that you can have a reasonable conversation with. And that really, a lot of times that starts with your own family, your own kids. So that's what I would tell you.
That verse you were looking for is Romans 12:18.
Romans
You
12,
said
18.
Paul. There's no book of Paul.
Well, I'm
He's
sorry.
just
Paul was the one
author.
that said it. Paul was the one that said it. Yeah, in the book of Romans. Okay, Daniel Black Wolf, thank you very much for the super chat. I'm voting for Trump again this time as well. The choice is Trump or the great darkness. Well, for me, I will never vote for that darkness and evil. I think that, I mean, so Christian, are you comfortable telling me?
Yeah, I'm going to get dragged on it because we have over 4,000 people watching live, and it's fine. I hope that the people that are on board with Trump, when they understand this, they look at it as a positive thing, not a negative thing. But I did not vote for Trump in 2020. I did not vote for Joe Biden. No, I've never voted for a Democrat in my entire life. But I did not vote for Joe Biden or Donald Trump in 2020. I, like the cringe 26-year-old I was at the time, voted for the libertarian candidate. Yeah. I'm proud to say I'm not a libertarian. Certainly not anymore. I was at the time. But like, yeah, I didn't vote for Trump in the last election. And I gave him a donation, first one in my entire life, last night, actually. Yeah. I actually bought a MAGA hat last night, and then I chipped in another $34 in reference to the conviction that he had. And I will enthusiastically vote for him. There is no this is another thing I tweeted recently. I said I did not vote for Donald Trump in 2020, but there is no force on earth that can prevent me from voting for him this cycle. Because the reason why is this is so much bigger than Donald Trump. This is so much bigger than any individual politician. We are dealing with a political force here that respects no limitations on power whatsoever. They have declared there is no coexistence, there is no compromise, there is submission, and they want to crush anybody that stands in their way. And my values are not libertarian values. My values are I want to preserve the country that I was born in, and I want to preserve Western civilization against the forces out there that have made it their mission to dismantle those things at any cost. And so at that point, those are my principles. My principles are to defend the civilization that I was born into and that I believe in, because otherwise there's no reason for me to. There's no reason for any of this otherwise. We can't live in the type of society that I want to live in otherwise. So, look, there's a lot that I don't like about Trump, There's a lot of policies that I don't like. There's a lot of personality things that I don't like, but this is much bigger than any one person. And we need to get him into the White House. And hopefully he can do the things that need to be done at this point in order to make sure that we don't cross the Rubicon any farther than we already have.
We have a ton of questions piling up, so let's
from Intensive Care Bear. Question: how do you keep sane talking to ideologues all the time? Legitimately impressed you guys have not gone completely insane living in the political world. Well, don't go too far, man. We already had somebody else.
No,
on
what
the
happens
super
is
chat.
you get jaded.
Yeah.
You get to the point where you recognize talking points when you hear them, and you recognize when people are just regurgitating talking points, and they just go in a category for you, and you just kind of like placate them and let them move on. I'm sorry, but that's just what we do. You see so much of it, and we're all done with it. So you kind of can see through all the crap.
Yeah, I can usually tell when somebody wants to have a good faith conversation versus when somebody doesn't want to have a good faith conversation. And what I've learned kind of the hard way, because originally I used to just sit there and engage with everybody. And the bottom line is you don't have enough time to engage with everybody. And you shouldn't just engage with the people that agree with you, but you should only engage with people that are actually willing to have a reasonable, good faith conversation. Otherwise, it's just a waste of your time.
Don't waste your time with them.
Yeah. All right. D. Irishman, thank you very much for the super chat. The jury vote 48 hours before, wait a second. Okay. The jury hours 48 before, a week. With passionate blue California family, advice for arguing and debating with loved ones far across the aisle while outnumbered. So 2 things, right? I'm very big on family. I'm very big on doing whatever you can to possibly preserve relationship with family that, as long as it's healthy, obviously. Here's what I would say. If you're going into a place where you're going to be drastically outnumbered and there's going to be a lot of presuppositions, but one of the tactics I like to use is I ask a lot of questions. Well, what did you think about this? Or I saw somebody said this. What do you think about that? Or do you think it would be fair if X happened? So there's a lot of things here with respect to, what happened to Trump, and why would they do this? Why would this doesn't seem to be something that they prosecute anybody else for? Why would they prosecute him for this? And you're gonna start to see real quick whether or not. And generally there's a spectrum within your family members, right? There's probably going to be somebody that is just, I can't believe you would say, I can't believe we're having this conversation. One of the things that can be valuable for you in a situation like this is that if you're calm, cool, collected, and you're just asking questions, and you're asking questions that are really causing them to think and have to consider things, you will see kind of a break take place where some people are just furious with you, and maybe they blow up at you, but the other people watching are actually impressed that you held your ground, but you were also calm, cool, and collected. You weren't mean. So essentially what I advise people to do with your family, be the adult in the room. Ask good questions, bring up good points, be respectful of the other person when they're talking. And even if you can't convince the person you're talking to, a lot of times the most important people within a conversation are not the ones you're directly engaging with, but the people sitting on the outside looking to try to get an idea of what they might believe on this particular topic. So that would be my advice. Go with asking questions. All right, Caleb Reed, does Biden back out of the recently agreed upon debates because he refuses to debate a convicted felon? Ooh.
I don't think so.
I don't know.
He needs the debates because he's down in the polls.
Yeah, but I'm not sure. So here's what I would say.
It depends on whatever his handlers say.
Well, if he that's true. But if he agrees to a debate, here's what you can expect to happen. You can expect the media and everyone leading up to the debate probably like talking a lot about how Biden was sick last week or whatever else, and so it's going to be tough. But he's persevering and he's vowed to be there regardless, even though he's not in, or whatever it is. They'll come up with some sort of reason to lower expectations for Biden, increase expectations for Trump. And then if Biden manages to stand up straight and not fall over, it'll be like, oh my gosh,
he won.
Look at what a wonderful performance. Any questions about Biden's mental capacity have to be just completely out of the question after this fine debate performance. That's what you can expect to see. So
I kind of think Biden might cool it just a little bit after this. And the reason I say that is because I think Biden knows he's not going to win this next election. And he's probably looking to get pardoned.
I don't think he thinks that at
don't
all.
think he
I think
thinks that at all.
Biden thinks that he's going to win.
Well, I mean, that's assuming Biden thinks.
All right, Nathan, question. How does the Trump verdict impact his electoral chances in November? All right.
It hurts him.
So Christian thinks it hurts him.
It hurts him.
I actually think it helps him.
If anything else, it hurts him because there's a good chance he'll be in either prison or house arrest rather than being able to campaign. And just by simple calculation, it hurts him. It radicalizes a lot of people. It's radicalized me. It's radicalized a lot of people in the comments. It's radicalized normal constitutional conservatives like Sean Davis and Matt Walsh. And some of those people didn't vote for him last cycle, like myself. But overall, this hurts him because the Democrats will be able to go to low information voters and say, well, you don't want to vote for a convicted felon, do you? And Trump is going to be hampered by the fact that he very well might not be able to leave his house.
That's one version of this. My version of this is this actually generates an incredible amount of sympathy. It also it generates an incredible amount of fundraising capability. And the other thing that it does is that ultimately, again, to the whole point of people just switching over to say that the longer we have to see situations of Trump being forced to not be able to effectively campaign, the more it creates an underdog scenario, which I think actually appeals to a lot of people. All right, Noah Schultz, thank you very much for the super chat. Question, now that Dems have changed the rules, how can we fight for our values without compromising them ourselves? Thank you for all you do. Nick, been watching the show since I was 16. Keep up the fight. Noah, thank you very much. And I want to thank you for the way that you worded that question because that is critical. The one thing I want to emphasize through all of this is that I do want to fight for our principles, and I don't want to compromise them at the same time. And that's the big question. Well, how do you do it? If we're now just saying, well, we're going to line up all the Democrats, if they're going to do it to us, then we're going to do it to them. Well, then how do you remain principled? Because I do believe that's important. I do believe that's important. And I think part of it comes with some of it is tearing down parts of the apparatus that make this possible. One of the reasons that this kind of lawfare is possible, and one of the reasons why we have so many problems, is because of the bureaucracy. It's because of the massive federal bureaucracy, which was never meant to be. The federal government was never supposed to have this much power. You have federal branch agencies that are making all kinds of laws, rules, and regulations that were all based off of a single bill that might have been passed. It's not as if your individual legislators, contemplated and debated that particular regulation and then voted on it. No, they gave wide sweeping authority to federal bureaucracy, and the federal bureaucracy did what they wanted with it. And they get away with it. And so it's going to take, for one, a president that is willing to voluntarily slash major portions of the federal bureaucracy. I mean, I'm talking like Javier Milei move. Now, the difficulty thing is Javier Milei has a lot more control in Argentina than the president of the United States has within the executive branch here. All right, but that's what needs to be done, first of all. Second of all, states, I think, are going to have to start pushing back, because one thing I disagree with Christian on is the Constitution is not a dead letter, but the Constitution is not capable of defending itself. It needs people who believe in it to fight for it. And so I think one of the things that you're going to start to see as federal, so again, to the extent that we're fighting against federal bureaucracy and we're fighting against some of this overreach, I think we're going to need more governors and state legislatures to start to stand up and say, nope, you're not doing that here. You're not doing it here. And that's going to take a lot of courage from governors and state legislatures. But that's where a lot of this fight is going to be. And in a place like Virginia, we have a Republican governor, Republican AG, Republican lieutenant governor, but then the Democrats control the General Assembly. So again, it forces problems. But the other thing too is lawsuits in reverse. I'm sorry, but the right is going to have to get a whole lot better at suing.
If you want to get through 13 more questions, you're going to be a lot faster than that.
All right, Christopher, question. There are many Republicans that are too weak to take action. Who by name do you think has the courage to take this fight to the left?
I mean, Donald Trump is the first one.
Donald Trump. The other thing too, look, I'm going to stand by our original statement. I think that Rand Paul has always had the courage to stand up both to his own. Here's one of the things you want to look for. Who is willing to stand up to authority regardless of which party they're in? So for instance, Rand Paul has been willing to stand up to authority. Thomas Massey was willing to stand up at a time where literally no one in the House of Representatives was willing to stand up. So you need guys that actually understand what the fight is, who are also willing to risk something in order to achieve it. I think Chip Roy fits within that category. And there's others we could mention as well, but that's just to name a few. All right. Where are we at here?
We already read that one.
Yeah, there we go. Okay. Post Prue. Thank you for the super chat. In my opinion, Trump being prosecuted is rooted with Trump trash talking Obama. Joe Harris occupies ceremonial positions. Owen and his people are in command of the executive office and forcing these lawsuits to occur and judges to make lawless decisions, aka Epstein. I don't know. I guess that's my answer to that one. I don't know. That could be true. I don't think it necessarily has to be true for everything to explain everything that's going on right now. I mean, obviously, I don't think Joe Biden is sit there. I don't think Joe Biden is masterminding much of anything. And that does beg the question, well, who is in charge? And that's when you start to look at the bureaucracy. You know, Christian and I have talked about this a lot before. The executive bureaucracy has a great deal of power. That doesn't always mean that the president does, unless the president is in line with the bureaucracy. All right. Cole, comment. Question, what would happen to Trump for a civil war or something similar to happen?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I mean, he would probably have to be like, I don't know, assassinated or something like that. I don't think we're at this
Wait, what's
point.
the question? What would happen
what would
to
have
Trump?
to happen
Oh.
for a civil war to be? Here's the thing. I don't think we're quite there yet. I think we're close. I think we're getting closer, but we're not quite. If you were to use a historical analogy, we're in 1932, 1933 Spain, not 1936. And so like we're not
I don't think
there
anyone
yet.
gets
Yeah.
that right.
If you study history, you do, but
let me roll this back.
Nick
All right?
doesn't like it.
Let me
because
roll this back because
there's no good sides in that conflict.
No, and we've got to preserve time here. Here's what I think. We've actually talked about this topic before, and again, the whole idea was how do you prevent a larger conflict from happening within the United States? Now, I will say this: a lot of people that like to LARP about civil wars and stuff like that don't have a good understanding of what it actually takes as far as conditions and catalysts. And I think the only way that you would really see some sort of like no kidding civil war, not just widespread rioting or things like that, but no kidding civil war, is that there has to be something legitimate to rally around. So if something were to happen to Trump, I don't know what looks like after that. It would depend on what happened and who was held responsible and everything else. But a lot of it would also depend on, okay, what do other figures that have a sense of legitimacy and authority, what would be their reaction to something like that? So let's just pray it doesn't happen. All right, Gary, question. Could this conviction cause ripple effects, not just in the USA, but around the world? Good evening from England. Well, I'll say this. I don't know if the conviction itself would. It's more about what is the American response to the conviction, because when you're talking about the United States, you're talking about the most powerful military in the world, most powerful economy in the world, and the world's reserve currency. So there's a lot of things that can happen in the United States that can affect countries overseas. I think it also depends on how maybe conservatives in a particular place perceive what's going on in the United States and associate themselves with it if similar things are happening in their own country. So there's a lot of factors in there. I wouldn't want to try to predict too much, but you know, I do think, again, when major things happen in the United States, it tends to have an outsized effect in other parts of the world, especially those places which either share certain values or culture or trading partners or things of that nature. Loyal to law question. Can Trump appeal this case? If yes, how, given that New York is blue all around? If no, will they now prevent him from being in the ballots to be voted in?
It depends. Well, no. He's not going to be prevented from being on the ballot, although they tried to do that as well. That's another thing that they tried to do.
They're actually trying to renew that because of, I don't know, whatever they...
He is going to appeal. He's going to lose the first appeal almost certainly. I mean, you can just look at the composition of the appeals court and no, he's going to lose the first appeal. But there's multiple appeals that he gets to go through, and there's a decent chance, I will not say it's guaranteed, but there's a decent chance that it will be overturned at some point. The question is that this could take like over a year.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go to loyal. Oh, sorry. Next one. Cyril Lewis. Question. I'm based in Hanover, and I notice a lot of people moving out of Richmond and bringing their bad politics. What do you recommend to preserve small town values, or do we just move? This is a question I've been thinking about a lot lately, because I'm never inclined to tell people, yeah, just get up and move. But there does tend to be a critical mass within an area where you fight for it, and then after a while you're overwhelmed. And so here's what I would say. To the extent possible, I try to fight for the area that I love and to try to preserve the values therein. When it becomes obvious that I've lost that battle, then the question that you have to ask yourself is, where are your resources best used? Are your resources best used fighting for an area that is essentially gone? Or is it better used in an area that still has a fighting chance? And I think that's a legitimate question. So I think you're going to have to ask about, what this means for you, what it means for your family, because that's always the first fight, right? It's your family. But I'm never going to tell somebody, no, under no circumstances you should fight to your dying breath to preserve your county or whatever. I'm not going to tell you that. I think you need to be able to make that own decision for you. My own personal position is, again, insofar as I feel like I can effectively fight to preserve the area I love, I'm going to do so. If it becomes obvious to me that I just can't, and that maybe those resources and my presence and what it might be, then that's a legitimate option, and it is something to consider. Arthur, thank you very much for the super chat. Could the American people file a class action suit against the Biden administration for preventing us from having free and fair elections?
Probably not.
Probably not. It's just, I know it's something that a lot of people look at like, okay, we got to get better at suing, so how do we do it? And part of the problem is that a lot of times, again, for conservatives, we don't want this to be the main focus of our life. We just want to get back to normal so we can get back to the things that really matter, our family, our jobs, our whatever else. But in a lot of these things, it's going to take consistency, and it's going to take consistency over time, right? You can win elections and you can win lawsuits, and we've seen that. We actually did a podcast that we're going to be airing here in a little bit with the Attorney General of Virginia, and he talks specifically about how he and other attorney generals have effectively sued the federal government and won cases, and then other times threatened lawsuits which forced executive branch agencies to stand down. And so it can be done, but instead of saying, why don't we just do it this way, we've got to focus on, okay, what are the ways that we can be the most effective? The Democrats, like the left, didn't get here by just doing class action lawsuits against a presidential election. They did it by slowly setting up conditions over time. That means school boards. That means boards of supervisors. That means district attorneys or Commonwealth attorneys. And so, again, I think we're going to have to be a little bit more disciplined and just understand that there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all silver bullet approach where, okay, now we've won and we can get back to it. All right, unknown super chat. Thank you very much. How and who do Republicans target for revenge?
Go follow Sean Davis on Twitter. He's compiling a list. He's literally compiling a list. There's all sorts of people, like Nancy Pelosi with insider trading is a good example. She hasn't been charged with any. That's illegal.
Yeah.
And she's absolutely engaged in it.
Well, and can we say this, right? Revenge should not be, I'm just going to go pick Democrats and start prosecuting them for things, right? I don't want to expand kangaroo courts. What I want to say is that, okay, at one point there were certain things that apparently just didn't get prosecuted. The new rule is anything you can potentially prosecute a politician for, prosecute him for it. Okay, if that's the rule, well then here's a list of politicians that have done some stuff that is legally questionable. Time to go prosecute, right? So that's where I would say you start with people that there are legitimate reasons. I do not want to prosecute anybody for which there is no legitimate reason to prosecute, right? But good news, there are people that have some shady stuff that should probably be investigated, and that's where you start. All right, Matronymic. I apologize if I screw up some of the names on this. Matronymic question. My family is all Democrats. How do I explain to them that I flipped? I want to do it without speaking emotionally and only stick to facts. Can you give a few simplified talking points? There was this funny thing that Black Rifle Coffee did on coming out to your family as conservatives, and it was hysterical. Can't recommend the language, but it was really funny. Here's what I would tell you. Again, to the extent that you want to share with your family that, hey, look, this is how I feel about this. Really practice. I mean, understand, your family, right? You know the reasons why they have the convictions or the beliefs that they do. And if you want to be able to share with them that your beliefs have changed, right? That's going to be a hard thing for your parents. And that could be a hard thing for siblings and other family members. Again, to the extent that you want to maintain those relationships, which I think is a positive thing, I think it's important to emphasize that, like, Mom, Dad, I love you. This is not a retribution of you. It's not a retribution of how you raised me. This is merely like, I've come to these conclusions and these are the reasons why. And again, all you can do is be reasonable, right? Again, going back to scripture, all you can do is speak the truth in love. If people decide to reject it, then their problem ultimately is not with you. Their problem is with the truth, or it is with maybe the position you've taken. But again, you can only do so much to live at peace with somebody. So do your best, reassure your family, you still love them, you still respect them, everything else, but you've chosen a different path, and this is why. And we'll see how they react. Maybe they'll be tolerant. All right, Brenda Belcher, question. Should we send our reps in Congress and the Senate tea bags to let them know the spirit of 1776 still lives in America? I think a better tactic would be to replace a lot of the ones that are currently there with ones that actually understand what the fight is all about. And again, when I say what is the fight all about, it's about understanding that this massive federal bureaucracy is a huge problem. And that as long as it stays intact in the current way that it is, I'm sorry, but it's going to continue to come after and go after its enemies. And it turns out more and more the enemies are us. And so it's not good enough to elect somebody that has an R by their name that says, "Oh yes, I'm very disappointed about the result." And what are you going to do? "Oh well, we're going to have a hearing. I'll tell you that much." Yeah. That does nothing for me. What are you practically going to do? Here's the deal: politicians respond to their constituents. They respond to incentives. So make sure they have the right incentives. Here's the other thing I would tell you: there's some groups out there that will tell you politicians are just tools and you should treat them as such. You're not going to get anywhere doing that. All right. If you find somebody that actually has demonstrated courage and they have demonstrated competency, then reward that. If you have a Republican, this is especially important for deep red districts. If you live in a deep red district and you have one of these shucks, good old boys that just, I do my best and I'm not happy about that, replace them. Time for him to retire, out to pasture. Thank you for your service, but you're no longer needed here. We're going to replace you with a representative that understands the fight and actually has the fire to go after it. That's one of the best things you could do is replace weak Republicans in deep red districts. It doesn't make a lot of sense to spend an enormous amount of time and energy trying to get a hardcore conservative into a purple district. It doesn't make a lot of sense, especially when you have a bunch of weak Republicans in red districts. Focus your energy there. All right. Samuel, thank you very much for the super chat. Will this set a precedent for lawsuits against other former presidents? Bush for WMDs, Obama for drone strikes, and Biden for corruption. When is the Supreme Court getting involved in this if this was rigged? I think it could, right? I don't know that it will, but I think it definitely could. I don't know how far back you're going to go. I think that most of like the legal retribution will come for cases because again, I do believe that conservatives still have a commitment to intellectual honesty, right? So it's not just you did something bad to me, so I'm going to do something bad to you. It's going to be you did something bad to me, and so I'm going to use the legal mechanisms to strike back. You saw this I'll tell you who's been the best at this so far in recent American politics: Ron DeSantis in Florida. Ron DeSantis was like, "Oh, Disney wants to wade into a political thing. Turns out you have a bunch of preferential tax treatment. Well, you don't need that anymore, do you? Why are we giving Disney something that we don't give everybody else?" Right? And so again, there's legal mechanisms that you can do it. Again, what we want is Cincinnatus. We don't want Sulla. Okay, is it Juna Leadin? I hope I got that right. Juna Leadin. Question. What would be your best arguments against your own side, the right? This is something interesting I usually think about as a fellow right-wing siding person. So again, if you're asking me to, we actually did a whole episode dedicated to this where I listed off. What I did was what I call steel manning. So you've heard of straw man arguments. Straw man arguments is when you give a weak representation of what the other side believes and then you easily knock it over. That's why it's called a straw man. Steel manning is when you give the best possible argument for the other side possible in order to determine whether or not that argument has any relevance or validity. So we did a whole episode where I sat there and my goal was this. It was to give an argument in such a way that if a left-wing person heard it, they would think, yes, exactly, that's what I believe. And then I systematically went around and I dismantled why I didn't think that argument actually held up under close scrutiny. So I would ask you to go look at that podcast because we don't have enough time to go through it all here, but that gives you probably the best representation and answer to your question. Denise Moldus. Denise Moldus. Question. Long ago when I was in college, a professor told us that a great country only lasts about 200 years and then starts to decline. What are your views on this, Christian?
Read Oswald Spengler's Decline of the West. He talks about this exact problem. He wrote this book about 100 years ago, and he said that civilizations go through a typical cycle. And that's... There's also it's not incorrect.
So there's a couple different ways. The most simplified version of the cycle is strong men create good times create weak men create bad times create strong men, and so on and so forth. The more complicated cycle has to do with things like tyranny, and then you have a return to like faith, which leads to a return for a desire for freedom and courage, which leads to and it goes around the cycle, and it always ends up returning back to tyranny, right? And the cycle kind of historically repeats. Now, I would say this: I don't think history repeats itself. I think it rhymes. I think that was the quote that somebody far smarter than me came up with. And so I don't think it's a perfect model, but I think it explains a lot. And yeah, there's a lot to be said for what happens when a society gets so affluent, so safe, and starts to embrace certain aspects. And sometimes this is referred to as decadence. Our good friend Rudyard at What If Alt Hist did a podcast on this that was pretty comprehensive. Hunt Outdoors, please read. Did this push the USA past the point of no return to national divorce, peaceful or violent?
No, but we're close.
No, I don't think it has. So again,
it's a good first step.
No, jeez, good gosh, Tina.
I'm kidding.
You had to quote the left, right? Good
Right.
first step.
Here's what I would say. We've done a couple episodes on this where we talked about conditions and catalysts. So a condition is something that creates the underlying, center, or what am I thinking of? The underlying motivations,
It
I
creates
guess.
the circumstances for a spark. So
for a catalyst.
If we're to use an analogy like the Bismarck analogy of the powder keg that is the Balkans before World War I.
Yeah.
The conditions is the powder.
Yeah.
It's the powder kegs being stacked up. The catalyst is the match being lit.
Yeah.
That ignites the explosion, right?
Yeah.
So in the World War I analogy, Franz Ferdinand, his assassination is the match being lit, but all of the other events before that, like the Bosnian crisis and the Balkan Wars and stuff like that, those are the powder kegs being stacked up before the. So this is a powder keg.
So we actually listed in our episode about this that Trump getting arrested was a condition, probably not a catalyst. A catalyst is pretty significant, right? It needs to be pretty bad for something to happen. Not to say that this isn't, but again, generally speaking, the United States is still a very peaceful, a very prosperous place when you look at the whole course of human history. So again, thankfully, civil war is not as easy to achieve as maybe some people think it is. So I think that certain conditions are there and they're certainly developing. I don't think we have the catalyst yet. And again, I hope we don't.
For instance, I think that rather than suggesting that we send tea bags to the politicians, we can just start tarring and feathering again. I think that actually will send a much stronger message. Like, we remember they threw the tea in the harbor, but there's a reason they were able to throw the tea in the harbor.
I'm with Tina.
I know. It was funny. The other day, Tina was like, we should bring back tarring and feathering. And I said, well, that's actually a pretty brutal process. And she goes, yeah, I know. We should bring back tarring and feathering. I was like, dang, baby. All right, Aaron, super chat. Thank you very much. Is it time for the right to abandon the idea of proportional response in their political
Yes,
fights?
absolutely. No, I'm dead serious. The second that if we want to guarantee that this will never happen again and that we can actually save the republic, to quote Megyn Kelly, because we all know the path that we're about to go down. And if you've studied history, you know the path that we're about to go down. Go look at the Roman Republic. If we want to avoid that path, and I think at this point, there's a plurality chance that we can't. But if we want to avoid it, I think there's only one way to do it. And it's the way that Matt Walsh and Sean Davis have been talking about on Twitter all day, which is, no. They've launched nuclear weapons. You have to retaliate at this point. Yeah. So, I mean, I want something like, no, you need to disproportionate retaliation. They have to feel the pain
the question,
before they stop.
Okay, I get that. The question is this: how do you do that without compromising your own principles? So again, I'm not a big fan. Let's look at this in military terms. This whole idea of, oh, well, they attacked us, so they bombed our building, so we'll bomb their building. Or it's they bombed our building, so now we're going to destroy your military so you know to never do this crap again. Like, there's a good argument to be made if you want to look at what Reagan did to the Iranian Navy after they did mining in the the Straits of Hormuz.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a response that got the Iranians to sit down and shut up for quite some time, right? At least for anything similar to that. So I believe in the idea of an overwhelming response. I still think the response has to have two components. One, it has to be legitimate. Right? You can't just do whatever you want because you will lose favor, right? This idea that, oh, we're just so powerful now, we can do whatever we want. No, you still have to keep a certain degree of moral legitimacy in what you're doing. It can be overwhelming as long as you maintain moral legitimacy. The other thing that's really important about this is that people have to understand we are doing this to elicit this response. We're not doing it as, well, this is the way it's done now, and we are off into the sunset. We're doing this so that you understand that you don't do this anymore. So you see, this is why the stove is hot. We don't come to the conclusion that, yes, more stove, right? So that's
I don't disagree.
Okay.
But it has to be an overwhelming response.
Yeah. Ulysses, comment, what if Trump loses because of this? That will be fascinating to see, because a lot of things will stem around the idea of how bad does he lose, right? If he loses and we're sitting here for months not knowing what the actual results are, or it's one of these things where on election night he's up in 4 swing states and then by Friday he's down in all 4, you're probably going to see some bad stuff. You're probably going to see I don't see.
If we get a Florida 2000 situation in the environment that we are now in, that could be a catalyst.
Yeah.
That could be a catalyst, not a condition.
That could be pretty bad, provided, again, some of the question would be, how do you, again, how do you, where do you rally around, right? What do you rally around, and then what do you do next? Like those are always really important questions, because it can go bad. This is, again, something our friend Rudyard always warns the right about. Is one of the things the left sometimes tries to do is to get an illicit response out of the right that causes the general population to say, oh, wait, you're crazy, right? And so it is important that when the right respond, they do so in a way that actually makes sense and maintains moral legitimacy. If you just say, screw this, we're doing it back, you will lose support. And you don't want that. Okay. So from super chat from my Asian peers in Cali. Hello, Nick. Your speech in the Virginia House of Delegates in 2016 to defend the it was to combat the dishonorable discharge of Private Martland for protecting the Afghanistan children still gives me chills. Big fan always. Thank you very much. To give everyone some context here, a Green Beret that we served in the same Special Forces group. I didn't know him, but we were in the same group, and he did a tour in Afghanistan, and there was a couple instances where children were abused. And the first time that they had this incident, Sergeant First Class Martland and his captain reported it up the chain, went up, and essentially nothing happened. They didn't really do anything about it. And then the second time something happened, a little boy had actually been brutally abused, and I'm avoiding saying certain words right now. Brutally abused. And so Sergeant First Class Martland kicked the living piss out of the abuser. And he had to do this for 2 reasons. One, I think it was morally justified just on its own grounds. But for the people like, well, wait a second, there's due process. They're in the middle of Afghanistan. It's a 12-man ODA, Special Forces A-team, and they have to maintain good relationships with the village they're operating in. And the person that actually perpetrated the atrocity was an Afghan police officer. So, no, I think he acted justifiably, both for the protection of the little boy as well as sending a message to the village that they could come to them for security and protection against that sort of abuse. And what ended up happening is years later, the military was going to basically kick him out of the military. I don't think they were going to dishonorably discharge him, but they were going to kick him out of the military. And enough people spoke up. Congressman Duncan Hunter in California led the charge up in Congress. We did some work here in Virginia, and the military basically reversed its decision and allowed Sergeant First Class Martin to serve honorably. And I think the country and the Army is better for it. But thank you. Another comment from, I guess, unknown. What action do you suggest we take that is not a hearing or a protest, which will turn into another January 6th? So first of all, I think you're absolutely correct that we do not want another January 6th. Right? That is not the sort of response that we need from this. Again, what I would say from the Cincinnatus approach, right? We're going to operate within the boundaries of the law. We're going to maintain moral legitimacy, but we're going to fight back. One of the biggest things that you can do that is so important going forward, look at all of the red districts across the country. Look at all of the red districts across your states. You look for the people that are not voting the way they should as Republicans in deep red districts, and you find someone to replace them. Because that is the weakest link in our armor. I will tell you right now, that is the weakest link in our armor right now, is that we don't have enough people that understand and appreciate the fight for what it is, serving in districts that would love somebody that would do that, right? It's too good old boy stuff. So that's where I would focus your attention. And then again, from a practical standpoint, once you're doing that, you need states and you need governors that are willing to start to really stand up to the federal government. Abbott has done a good job of this in some respects. Ron DeSantis has done a good job of this. We need more people that are willing to do that. And you need state legislatures that are willing to back them up. Plus, you need people on the federal level that are really, really willing to push the envelope and drastically cutting the federal bureaucracy. I cannot emphasize this enough. So much of this problem is rooted in a massive federal bureaucracy, right? You get rid of that, you get rid of a lot of this. And you can do it all legally, and you can do it all in a way that's morally justifiable. Love, grow, live free. Question: why aren't more people understanding that it's not a Republican versus Democrat because they are all in the same pockets? It's actually we the people versus the New World Order.
I half agree.
I don't agree that they're all in the same
disagree.
pockets.
All right, you guys go.
I feel like, no offense, but I feel like that's a cop-out. We are not the same. We're not in the same pockets. There are bad actors, like Nick's talking about Republican areas that have bad actors who go and they make the deals with the Democrats, but that is not a majority of them. And so to say that they're all in the same pockets is a little disingenuous. It kind of reeks of low information voter, which I doubt that you are because you're watching our show. So please don't say that because it's not true.
The other problem too is that we the people are not on the same side.
No.
And we need to stop deluding ourselves into thinking that we the people are on the same side. Part of the reason that we're in this mess is because half of our countrymen have fallen for a collective madness.
Yeah.
That's the point that we're at. That's the reason that we're in this mess. It's not we the people versus shadowy forces. It's we the people versus shadowy forces plus half of our own country.
I think it's important when I've had people ask me before, and again, I'm saying this with respect because I appreciate your question. I've had people ask me before, why can't people just get together and do what we the people want? I'm like, because we the people don't agree, and we the people send very, very different people to represent them in the places of power in this country, whether it be at the state legislature or the federal. And so we have to understand that this idea that we're just such an overwhelming majority, I'm sorry, that isn't true. This country is fairly evenly split on a lot of these issues. And that's one of the things that's kind of scary because the issues have gone from arguing about the top marginal tax rate to whether or not boys can get undressed in girls' locker rooms, right? Some of these things are reasonable people can disagree with, and some of these things are just diametrically opposed. And again, one of the things that federalism was meant to help with is this idea that, well, look, we agree we're all Americans and there's certain tenets we all agree on, but California is going to California and Tennessee is going to Tennessee. The problem is that a large portion of this country believes that no, Tennessee must also have the advantages of all of the wonderful things we're doing in California. I mean, my gosh, it's ridiculous that I walk through Nashville and don't see a single homeless encampment, right? Like, that's part of the problem, is that if you're going to insist that your worldview must be imposed, not just in your locality, not just in your county, not just in your state, but across the whole country, that's when you create conditions where people say, okay, why are we still here then? Because we don't want to share the same country. We don't want to live the same way. And if you're not willing to let me leave the state and enjoy something different in another state, what are you leaving me with?
The other thing, too, is that we as the people are really, really tired of the people who are representing us totally abandoning whatever it is that they said they were going to do. There's a lot of compromising happening, like on the right. We see they'll compromise with the left. They think they can get it through. And we'll see this all the time during budget debates. Yeah. And what happens every single time any Republicans actually do stand up? Well, we lose the election, and the reason why is because Democrats somehow, with all of their, left-leaning media sources and things like that, always point to us and say, well, they're shutting down the government. Oh, no, we've got to avert the government shutting down.
What will we ever do if the Department of Energy is not making our gas prices more expensive?
And so the very people that are like, yes, good, we want less government, and, why won't our Republicans stand up and do something, are oftentimes the very same people that are really pissed off when the government gets shut down because we have an argument over the budget and what we're willing to support and not support. And so basically, people say they want one thing, but it doesn't bear out. What they really want is the status quo, unfortunately.
Okay, we're gonna take a few more here because we're actually running a little bit over time, and we've actually got to be somewhere else today. But again, I want to take one too. There was a super chat that came up from I think it was Rex Ryan, and Rex Ryan actually he did a super chat, and so I want to make sure that we hear from him. But he basically said that he lost all respect for me watching this episode. That he thought I was a reasonable and sensible person, and what this episode has demonstrated to him is that I am not. And Ryan, all I can tell you is I'm sorry you feel that way, brother. I really am, but I don't know how to address what's going on right here. If reasonable means I'm supposed to just sit here and say, hey guys, it's okay, we'll get them at the ballot box, and not actually make people more aware of what's going on and what led up to this. If that's reasonable, then we're going to lose. And honestly, with all due respect, I really do think the other side has been counting on our reasonableness to an insane degree. At some point, it is no longer reasonable to just sit there and be kicked. At some point, the only reasonable response is to fight back in ways that you currently are not. And I feel like I've gone out of my way this entire episode to say, look, we have to stay within that category that is morally legitimate. We have to stay within that category. We have to fight for our principles without compromising them in a way that turns us into the very thing that we're fighting against. I feel like I've made that abundantly clear. But again, sometimes people are not going to be happy with it. And again, if you're not, I understand, but I don't think I'm wrong. And I don't think I'm being unreasonable. All right, we got a couple more super chats and then we got to get out of here. And again, I apologize that we couldn't get to everybody's question, but I think we got to most everybody's. Gold Picard, thank you very much. Nick, you guys are saying we need a Cincinnatus, yet if we're watching Brandon Herrera's attempt to remove Tony Gonzalez from Texas, District 23, how do we do that when others are that blind? So what he's referring to is, again, Brandon Herrera put up a really, really good fight. I think he got outspent like 10-1.
He lost by 1 percentage point.
Yeah, by 1 percentage point. Now, here's what I'll say. That was a loss for us. There's no question that was a loss for us. But have you seen the number of Republican legislators who got their butts kicked for either in various states for either trying to impeach the attorney general inappropriately or for not supporting school choice? This is one of the biggest things. And this goes back to all the questions on what do we do now? I will tell you this much. All of you as parents need to look real hard at what your children are being taught within their public school system. You do. Because you probably have this image that, oh, well, no, my school district's not like that. Maybe it isn't. Maybe your teacher, maybe they're all great. Maybe all the administrators, maybe there's no problems in your school. I don't know. I know there's a lot of good teachers. I also know there's some bad ones. But I know this much, having served on an education committee, there's a lot of stuff being put in front of your children, all right, that would go way outside the boundaries of anything you experienced when you were in school. And it doesn't do much good to fight hard and to win elections if you are losing the minds of your own children. So before you give any consideration to fighting all these battles outside here, win the battle within your own home. And for some of you, that might mean pulling your kids out. For some of you, it might mean homeschooling. I'm not going to presume to know what works best for your family, but I am going to tell you, if you're competing with a school district or if you're competing with a system that is teaching your kids things you don't want them taught, well, then you don't get to be surprised when they don't vote the way you want or when they end up supporting this stuff. So please put your focus and attention there. And again, Corey DeAngelis has talked a lot about this. There actually have been a lot of good victories for us on the state level of replacing rhinos with people that actually believe in the fight. All right, Rebel Alliance, thank you for the super chat. How can we trust our politicians? We know that a lot of them have allegiances with NGOs and their own profit.
I feel like you just kind of
country.
answered that at least halfway.
Yeah, same thing. Researcher representatives don't just say, oh, I got a Republican, I'm good. Actually look at their voting record. And actually, there's some organizations out there that I think do a better job of actually grading voting. The American Conservative Union is one. I think Club for Growth is another one. A lot of times, the Gun Owners of America, that's another a good group. National Association for Gun Rights. There's various groups out there that have a much deeper commitment than just giving Republicans good scores. And take a look. And if you're living in a really red district and you've got a Republican that's got like a 60% lifetime score with the ACU or even a 70%, I bet you could replace him with a 90% pretty quick. And that would have a huge impact. Okay, listen, I apologize. I'll get to these last two very quickly. Comment question: if Trump is not able to run, who are some of the best candidates that Republicans would endorse?
No, it's going to be Trump.
I'm going to tell you right now, it's going to be Trump. And I don't think we should I don't even want to give the other side an option at this point. And again, I can't believe I'm saying that, but I am. I am absolutely saying that it needs to be Trump, and it will be Trump. Comment: do you think that the national default is the catalyst? I don't think most normal people understand the gravity of what it would mean for normal people. Christian has actually articulated this, and go ahead, Christian, give a quick synopsis.
So the answer, do you think that national default is the catalyst? Yes, that will be the catalyst. The conditions are are
let's
met or close to being met. Once you get to a point where the interest on the debt exceeds federal tax revenues, that's the financial point of no return, where it'll be inevitable that the federal government will go into a form of sovereign default. I don't mean that they stop paying the debt. I mean that they print the money to pay the debt. And then at that point, when the federal law enforcement is being paid in monopoly money, yes, that will be the catalyst.
It turns out it's really hard to impose your edicts when the cops and the military isn't getting paid. That's kind of like the fundamental thing. Not to mention the fact that when all of a sudden your Social Security check doesn't mean anything and all these like grandiose government programs are no longer funded, you're going to have people rising up and looking for some sort of alternative. And the real question is what happens. So once again, whole goal of this entire discussion is we don't want these things to happen. We want to save our country to the extent possibly. We want to do it as we want to do it peacefully, right? Ladies and gentlemen, I've fought in a war. The last thing I want is for any sort of drastic violence or civil unrest in my own backyard. I don't want it. I want us to return to a point where we recognize that part of the reason why we have these troubles is because we have a federal government so massive that it can constantly interfere in our life and be weaponized against us. And part of the solution is not just controlling who wields the sword, but blunting the sword, taking it away and giving it back to where it was always meant to be. But in order to do that, you have to have people that actually understand what this fight is all about and are willing to fight it while maintaining moral legitimacy, but willing to actually fight it and stop treating people that are going after you and trying to ruin your life as if, oh, they're just my fellow colleagues. I'm tired of being treated like an enemy. If you're going to treat me like an enemy, well, then don't be surprised when one day I decide to act like it. But that's not what I want. I want to live in peace with my fellow Americans. I want to live in a country where each of us can pursue happiness without infringing on the rights of others. But if one side is going to constantly insist in concentrating power in order to use it to punish people that disagree with them and still want to live at peace, I don't know what to do with that. But I'll tell you this, I'm not going to live under it. Once again, thank you for joining us. We hope you found the analysis beneficial. We've got some new stuff. I got Tina glaring at me right now. So we did get our
Convict Around and Find Out.
Convict Around and Find Out mugs that are up in our shop. If that's something that you're interested in, go check that out. Also, go check out our community within the show notes as well.
Onlymugs.com.
Yeah. But once again, thank you very much for joining us. Now let's go out there. Let's get to it, and we'll see you next episode.